The nightmare always began the same way. Jackson Hargrove stood in the field hospital at Devil's Canyon, surrounded by the moans of dying men. Blood soaked the ground beneath his boots, turning the earth to crimson mud. The air reeked of gunpowder and gangrene. Before him lay two wounded soldiers, one in Confederate gray, the other in Union blue. Both were slipping away their lives, leaking out with each labored breath. He had supplies enough to save only one. The Confederate was a boy no more than 17, with fair hair plastered to his forehead. The son of a gentleman, judging by his well-made uniform. His eyes, blue as a summer sky, pleaded silently. The Union soldier was older, perhaps 30, with a chest wound that bubbled with each breath. His chances were poorer, but he wore captain's bars. He could save dozens more men if he lived. "Choose doctor," a voice whispered in his ear. "Who lives? Who dies?" Jackson made his choice. He always made the same choice. He woke with a strangled gasp, sweat soaking his nightshirt. For a moment he was still there, surrounded by death and impossible choices. Then slowly reality reasserted itself. The familiar beams of his bedroom ceiling, the quilt his wife Hannah had made during their first winter at Lone Star Ranch, the silver moonlight filtering through curtains that needed mending. He pressed a hand to his chest, feeling the raised scar that ran from collarbone to sternum, a parting gift from a Confederate cavalryman who'd objected to a Yankee doctor treating Southern boys. The wound had healed 15 years ago, but sometimes it ached as if fresh made, especially on nights like this. Jackson reached for the silver pocket watch on his bedside table. The case was worn smooth from 3 generations of Hargrove men handling it. His grandfather had carried it through the Mexican War, his father through a lifetime of building the family's modest fortune in Ohio. Now it rested in his palm, ticking steadily, marking time that felt increasingly hollow. He clicked it open. Inside the lid was a small daguerreotype of Hannah and their son James, taken just months before the fever took them both. Hannah's serious expression belied the warmth she'd carried in life. Photographers required such stillness that smiles were impossible to capture. But Jackson could see it in her eyes, that quiet joy that had sustained him through dark days. And James, only 4 years old, standing straight and proud beside his mother, his small hand clasped in hers. 7 years, Jackson whispered to the empty room. 7 years since he'd buried them on the hill beneath the old pine tree. 7 years of waking to silence in a house built for a family's laughter. Outside, the first light of dawn painted the eastern sky in pale gold. Jackson rose, his movements made efficient by years of routine. He washed, shaved, and dressed methodically. Then he descended to the kitchen, where he kindled a fire in the stove and set coffee to boil. While the coffee percolated, he stepped onto the front porch. Lone Star Ranch spread before him, a modest spread by Colorado standards, but substantial enough. 200 acres of good grazing land nestled in a valley surrounded by pine-covered hills. The barn and corrals needed paint. The garden where Hannah had grown vegetables and herbs was overgrown with weeds. In the distance, a herd of about 60 cattle grazed on the summer grasses. It was a living, but barely. Without Hannah's talent for stretching a dollar and making do, Jackson struggled to keep the place running. The ranch hands he'd once employed had drifted away after her death, some to better-paying jobs, others because they couldn't stomach his grief-stricken silence. Now he worked the land alone, his medical training gathering dust like the jars of herbs in Hannah's abandoned stillroom. Today marked 15 years since he'd purchased Lone Star Ranch. It should have been a day of modest celebration. Instead, it was a reminder of promises unfulfilled and a future that would never be. Jackson saddled his horse, a steady buckskin gelding named Samson, and rode toward the hill at the northern edge of his property. The morning air was crisp with early autumn, the aspens beginning to turn gold against the dark green of the pines. He followed the narrow trail up the slope, Samson's hooves sure on the familiar path. At the crest stood a massive ponderosa pine, its branches spreading like protective arms over 2 simple granite markers. Jackson dismounted, tethering Samson to a lower branch, and approached the graves with the wildflowers he'd gathered along the way. "Morning, Hannah. Morning, James." His voice was rough from disuse. He rarely spoke aloud except on these visits. "Brought you some Indian paintbrush. Remember how you loved them, Hannah? How you said they were like little flames lighting up the meadow?" He knelt, placing the flowers between the 2 stones. From his pocket, he withdrew a folded letter, the last Hannah had written to him during a brief trip to Denver. The paper was worn thin at the creases from years of rereading. "My dearest Jackson," he read, though he knew the words by heart. "The city is all bustle and noise, and I find myself missing the quiet of our valley. James asks for you constantly. This morning he tried to mount Samson himself, claiming he's big enough to ride to Denver and bring me home." Jackson paused, his throat tight. He could almost hear Hannah's laughter in the words. "I'll be home in 3 days' time sooner if Mr. Davis finishes our business early. Remember your promise to fix the leak in the kitchen roof before I return? I promise to be by your side always, Jackson, no matter what comes." But she hadn't kept that promise. No one's fault, certainly not hers. The fever had swept through Pine Ridge like wildfire, claiming a dozen lives, including the two most precious to him. He'd been away treating outbreak victims in a mining camp 50 miles distant. By the time he'd returned, Hannah and James were already buried beneath the pine. Jackson refolded the letter carefully and returned it to his pocket. 15 years at Lone Star today," he said, running his fingers over the cool granite of Hannah's marker. "You'd hardly recognize the place now. Garden's gone wild. Roof still leaks when it rains hard." He smiled faintly. Never did get around to fixing it properly. As a doctor, Jackson had witnessed death countless times. He'd learned to detach himself, to see the body as a mechanism that had simply ceased functioning. But with Hannah and James, that clinical distance had been impossible. Their absence was a physical ache that never quite subsided, a phantom limb that still pained him long after it was gone. "I should have been here." He whispered the words of familiar litany. "I could have saved you both." This was his deepest shame, the thought that haunted his dreams alongside the battlefield choices. He had been a doctor trained to heal, to save lives, and he had failed those who mattered most. The irony was not lost on him. During the war, he had saved hundreds of strangers, while his own family had perished without him. Samson nickered softly, pulling at his tether. The sun had climbed higher, burning away the morning mist. Jackson rose, brushing dirt from his knees. "I'll be back soon," he promised, as he always did. Then he mounted Samson and rode down toward Pine Ridge. The town had changed little in 15 years. If anything, it had shrunk. When the railroad company had chosen to route the tracks through neighboring Millbrook instead, Pine Ridge had begun a slow decline. Now it consisted of a single dusty street lined with weathered buildings: Myers Pharmacy, Eleanor Finch's boarding house, the Pine Ridge Mercantile, Reverend Lawrence's modest church, and a handful of other businesses struggling to stay afloat. Jackson tethered Samson outside Myers Pharmacy. Samuel Meyer was the closest thing Pine Ridge had to a doctor these days. At 76, Meyer's hands shook too badly for delicate work, but his mind remained sharp, and he knew more about herbs and tinctures than most medical men. The bell above the door jingled as Jackson entered. The pharmacy smelled of alcohol, dried herbs, and the faint mustiness of old books. Meyer looked up from his mortar and pestle, his spectacles perched on the end of his nose. "Jackson Hargrove," he said, his voice creaky with age. "Right on time. Tuesday morning, regular as clockwork." Jackson nodded, placing a folded list on the counter. "The usual, Sam, plus some extra quinine if you have it. Think we might be in for a wet autumn." Meyer squinted at the list through his spectacles. "Quinine's dear these days. Railroad charges extra for anything coming from back east." He studied Jackson's face. "You're looking peaky. Sleeping any better?" "Well enough," Meyer snorted, "which means not at all. I could mix you something." "No." Jackson's refusal was firm but gentle. "I don't need laudanum or sleeping powders." "Wasn't thinking of either," Meyer said mildly. "Some valerian root maybe, chamomile. Nothing a man could get dependent on." Jackson shook his head. The dreams were his penance, a reminder of choices made and consequences borne. He didn't deserve the oblivion of dreamless sleep. As Meyer gathered the items on Jackson's list, the pharmacy door opened again. Harvey Parker Pine Ridge's deputy sheriff entered, removing his hat. At 35, Parker was still trim and fit, though the war had left its mark in the slight limp of his left leg and the premature gray at his temples. "Doc," Parker said, nodding to Jackson. The title was a holdover from years past when Jackson had occasionally helped Meyer with medical emergencies. Few in Pine Ridge remembered he'd once been a battlefield surgeon. "Harvey," Jackson acknowledged. "Trouble?" "Nothing urgent. Mrs. Finch is on the warpath about those drovers who passed through last week. Says they left her parlor smelling like a stable." Parker grinned. "Told her I'd investigate, but unless smelling bad became a crime while I wasn't looking, Not much I can do. Meyer chuckled as he wrapped Jackson's supplies in brown paper. Eleanor's standards would make a palace maid blush. Don't know why she bothers running a boarding house when every guest offends her sensibilities. Money, Parker said simply. Not much call for anything else in Pine Ridge these days. A commotion outside drew their attention, the clatter of wheels and horses' hooves, the sound of men shouting. Parker moved to the window, peering out through the dusty glass. Well, I'll be damned, he murmured. Stage is in, 3 days early. This was unusual enough to draw all three men outside. The Pine Ridge stagecoach normally arrived only on Fridays, bringing mail and the occasional passenger from Denver. Its unexpected appearance on a Tuesday morning was the most exciting thing to happen in months. Sullivan, the stage driver, was already climbing down from his perch, his face flushed and sweaty despite the cool morning. He was a burly man in his 40s with a thick mustache and forearms corded with muscle from years of handling reins. Need the doc, he called, scanning the small crowd that had gathered. His gaze landed on Jackson. Got a woman inside. Took sick about 10 miles back. Thought she'd make it, but she's gone worse. Jackson hesitated. He hadn't practiced medicine in years, not properly. But Meyer was already nudging him forward. Go on, the old pharmacist muttered. I'm too old to be crawling in and out of coaches. With reluctance, Jackson approached the stage. Sullivan opened the door, revealing a woman slumped against the far seat. Her traveling dress was a simple blue cotton, dusty from the road. Her face was partially obscured by a curtain of auburn hair that had come loose from its pins. Miss, Jackson said, climbing into the coach, can you hear me? The woman stirred, raising her head with visible effort, and Jackson felt the world shift beneath him. Those eyes, green as spring grass after rain. He knew those eyes, though he hadn't seen them in 16 years. Little Adelaide Winters, he breathed. She was no longer the 11-year-old girl he remembered, the one who'd followed him around during that long-ago summer when her family had stayed in Pine Ridge. She was a woman now, perhaps 27, with the fine features of her mother and a weariness that spoke of hard miles traveled. Recognition flickered in her eyes, followed by relief and then wariness. Dr. Hargrove, she whispered. I wasn't sure you'd still be here. Adelaide, Meyer had appeared at the stage door, peering in with frank curiosity. Adelaide Winters, Thomas Winters' girl. She nodded weakly. Yes, sir. Though my father, he passed 5 years ago. Sorry to hear it. Fine man, your father. Meyer's gaze sharpened. You're looking peaked, girl. What brings you to Pine Ridge after all this time? Adelaide's eyes darted nervously to Sullivan and the small crowd of onlookers. I was hoping to find work, teaching perhaps, or as a companion. Her fingers tightened on her small traveling bag. Is there somewhere I might stay? A hotel or boarding house? Eleanor Finch runs the only boarding house now, Jackson said, studying her face. There was something she wasn't saying, a tension in her shoulders and that spoke of more than mere travel fatigue. She's particular about her guests, but I'll take you there, Meyer interrupted. Eleanor and I go back 40 years. She won't turn away Thomas Winters' daughter, not with me vouching for her. Adelaide attempted to stand, but swayed dangerously. Jackson caught her elbow, steadying her. As he did, her sleeve rode up slightly, and he glimpsed a bandage wrapped around her forearm, a small spot of blood seeping through the linen. You're hurt, he said quietly. It's nothing. She tugged her sleeve down quickly. Just a scratch from loading my trunk in Denver. It was a lie, and they both knew it, but Jackson didn't press. Whatever trouble Adelaide was in the middle of Pine Ridge's main street wasn't the place to discuss it. With Jackson's support, Adelaide managed to exit the stage. Sullivan unloaded her small trunk, surprisingly light for someone who claimed to be relocating, and Meyer directed 2 local boys to carry it to the boarding house. As they made their way down the street, Adelaide walked with obvious effort, her face pale beneath a light dusting of freckles. Jackson noted how her eyes scanned their surroundings, lingering on alleyways and rooftops, as if expecting danger from above. Eleanor Finch's boarding house was the largest building in Pine Ridge, a 2-story structure with a wide front porch and gingerbread trim that had once been white, but had weathered to a dull gray. Eleanor herself stood in the doorway, arms crossed over her ample bosom, watching their approach with undisguised curiosity. At 62, Eleanor was a formidable presence, tall, broad-shouldered, with iron gray hair, pulled back in a severe bun, and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She'd been widowed for nearly 20 years, but showed no signs of fragility. If anything, she'd grown more formidable with age, ruling her establishment with an iron hand and unwavering moral standards. "Samuel," she greeted Meyer, "this is unexpected. Who might this young lady be?" "Adelaide Winters," Meyer said. "Thomas Winters' daughter. Remember them? Stayed here one summer? Oh, must be 15, 16 years back." Eleanor's gaze sharpened. "The mining engineer's family. Yes, I recall." She examined Adelaide with frank assessment. "You've grown, child. Your mother was a lovely woman. Is she with you?" "Mother passed 3 years ago," Adelaide said softly. "I'm traveling alone." Eleanor's expression cooled noticeably. "Alone, no husband, no companion." "No, ma'am." Adelaide straightened slightly. "But I assure you I'm respectable. I worked as a nurse in Denver until recently. I can provide references." A nurse, Eleanor's tone suggested she might as well have said, "dance hall girl." "Unmarried women working in hospitals. It's not natural." "Mrs. Finch," Meyer intervened. "Adelaide needs rest. She's had a long journey." "I have standards, Samuel. A single woman traveling alone with no clear purpose." "She's looking for teaching work," Jackson interrupted, "and she's Thomas Winter's daughter. Surely that counts for something." Eleanor sniffed. "Thomas Winters has been gone from Pine Ridge for many years. His name carries no special weight here now." She turned to Adelaide. "I'm sorry, Miss Winters, but I cannot offer you accommodation. Perhaps in Millbrook." Adelaide's face drained of what little color remained. Her knees buckled, and Jackson barely caught her before she hit the porch boards. "She's fainted," he said, lifting her easily. Her slight weight concerned him. She was too thin. "Mrs. Finch, regardless of your policies, this woman needs medical attention." Eleanor wavered, her rigid propriety warring with basic humanity. Before she could decide, Jackson made the choice for her. "I'm taking her to my place," he said firmly. "Sam, grab her bag. Harvey, if you could see to her trunk." Without waiting for their response, Jackson carried Adelaide to where Samson waited. With Parker's help, he managed to mount while cradling her against his chest. Her head lolled against his shoulder, her breath warm against his neck. "Jackson," Eleanor called, her voice sharp with disapproval, "this is most irregular. A single woman staying alone with a widower." "Mrs. Finch," Jackson cut her off, his voice quiet but carrying the authority of his military days. "I am taking this woman to my home to provide medical care. If you're concerned about propriety, you are welcome to join us as chaperone." One of the suggestions silenced her. Eleanor Finch had not set foot outside Pine Ridge in 20 years. The idea of traveling 5 miles to Lone Star Ranch was clearly unthinkable. "I'll come out later," Meyer said, placing Adelaide's small bag in Jackson's free hand. "Bring my medical kit." Jackson nodded his thanks, then urged Samson forward. As they left Pine Ridge behind, he looked down at the woman in his arms. Adelaide Winters, the curious, bright-eyed girl who'd once followed him around, asking endless questions about herbs and healing. Now a woman unconscious and clearly in some kind of trouble. What had brought her back to Pine Ridge after all these years? And why was she traveling alone, injured and afraid? The answers would have to wait. For now, his only concern was getting her safely to Lone Star and tending to whatever wound she was concealing beneath that carefully wrapped bandage. Adelaide woke to unfamiliar surroundings. Sunlight filtered through lace curtains, casting dappled patterns on a patchwork quilt. The room was simply furnished: a dresser with a porcelain wash basin, a rocking chair by the window, a small table with a kerosene lamp. The air smelled of lavender and clean linen. For a moment, panic seized her. Where was her bag? The journal, had they found her? She tried to sit up and gasped as pain lanced through her left shoulder. Memory flooded back at the stagecoach arriving in Pine Ridge. Hargrove's shocked recognition. She must be at his home. The door opened and Jackson Hargrove entered carrying a tray. He moved with the quiet efficiency she remembered from childhood, though time had etched lines around his eyes and silvered his dark hair at the temples. Still a handsome man, she thought distantly, though grief had hardened the gentle features she recalled. "You're awake," he said, setting the tray on the bedside table. "How's the shoulder?" Adelaide tensed. "I don't know what you mean." "Please don't." His voice was gentle but firm. "I had to remove your jacket and loosen your bodice to check your breathing. I saw the gunshot wound." Alarm flickered across her face. "Did anyone else?" "No, Meyer hasn't arrived yet. I cleaned and re-bandaged it myself. He poured water from a pitcher into a glass. Drink, you're dehydrated. Adelaide accepted the water, drinking deeply. Her throat was parched, her head pounding. How long was I unconscious? About 3 hours. It's just past noon. Jackson sat in the rocking chair, studying her with a doctor's clinical gaze. The wound is a few days old. Clean through the flesh, no bullet to remove. You were lucky. Lucky, she repeated with a bitter smile. Yes, I suppose that's one word for it. Adelaide, Jackson leaned forward, his expression grave. You show up in Pine Ridge after 16 years alone with a gunshot wound poorly tended. You're clearly afraid of something or someone. I think you owe me an explanation. She looked away, studying the lace curtains as if they held the secrets of the universe. I can leave as soon as I'm able. I don't want to bring trouble to your door. The trouble's already here. It arrived with you. His voice softened. Whatever it is, I might be able to help. Adelaide turned back to him, really looking at him for the first time. The boy-faced doctor she remembered had become a weathered rancher, his hands calloused from work, his skin tanned by the Colorado sun. But his eyes were the same warm brown, filled with the compassion that had once made him an excellent physician. Why would you help me? She asked. You barely know me. I knew your father. He was a good man. Jackson paused. And you were a bright child who deserved better than whatever's hunting you now. The simple kindness in his voice nearly undid her. Adelaide had spent so long being strong, running, hiding, protecting others, that the offer of protection for herself was almost unbearable. Before she could respond, a sound from downstairs made them both freeze, a thud, followed by a crash of breaking glass. Stay here, Jackson whispered, rising. From a drawer, he withdrew a revolver, checking it with practiced hands. Adelaide's heart hammered against her ribs. Rapunzel Hargrove. Jackson, he corrected absently, his attention on the door. Jackson, she whispered. If it's them, they won't hesitate to kill you. His eyes met hers, and something in his expression made her breath catch, a calm acceptance of danger that spoke of a man with nothing left to lose. Then I'd better not hesitate either, he said quietly, and slipped from the room. Adelaide lay frozen, straining to hear. Muffled voices drifted up from below, followed by what sounded like laughter. A moment later, Jackson reappeared in the doorway, his posture relaxed, the revolver tucked away. It's just Meyer, he explained. Knocked over a vase in the hallway. Clumsy old goat. Relief washed over her, followed quickly by renewed anxiety. Did you tell him about the wound? No, told him you fainted from exhaustion and dehydration. But he'll want to examine you himself. He may be old, but he's no fool. Adelaide's fingers twisted in the quilt. I should go, now before what? Jackson returned to the rocking chair. Before whoever shot you tracks you to Pine Ridge, to my ranch. He shook his head. Running now won't help. You need rest, proper medical care, and a plan, all of which I can provide if you'll trust me. Trust. Such a simple word for such an impossible thing. Adelaide had trusted before, and it had nearly cost everything. But where else could she go? She had no money for further travel, no strength to continue running. And Lily and Isaiah were counting on her. The thought of the children sent a fresh wave of anxiety through her. Were they safe? Had they followed her instructions to remain hidden until she returned? Or had Blackwell's men found them already? Adelaide, almost shining. Jackson's voice broke through her spiraling fears. Whatever trouble you're in, it's not going to disappear if you run again. Let me help. She studied his face, searching for any sign of deception or ulterior motive. She found none. Only steady compassion and the quiet competence she remembered from childhood. All right, she said finally. But first I need my bag. It's important. Jackson nodded toward the dresser where her small traveling bag sat. It's there. Meyer brought it. Your trunk is downstairs. Adelaide's relief was palpable. She started to rise, but winced as pain shot through her shoulder. Let me, Jackson said, retrieving the bag. He placed it on the bed beside her, but made no move to open it. I'll be downstairs with Meyer. Join us when you're ready. There's a robe on the hook behind the door if you'd like to cover your nightdress. Only then did Adelaide realize she was wearing a white cotton nightgown, clearly not her own. Heat rushed to her cheeks. I had Mrs. Peterson, the widow who helps with my housekeeping, change you, Jackson said, correctly interpreting her embarrassment. Your clothes were dusty and blood-stained. She's washing them now. With that, he left, closing the door softly behind him. Adelaide waited until his footsteps receded down the stairs before opening her bag with trembling fingers. Everything seemed untouched, her spare chemise and stockings, a small purse containing what little money she had left, a daguerreotype of her parents, and most importantly, the journal, its leather cover worn smooth with handling. She ran her fingers over the embossed initials A.W., feeling the familiar comfort of its presence. The journal contained everything: her careful notes on Blackwell's hospital, the names and descriptions of women and children who had disappeared into its wards, never to emerge, the financial records she'd managed to copy showing payments for labor contracts that looked suspiciously like slavery by another name. It was evidence enough to ruin Blackwell if she could get it to the right authorities. And it was the reason he wanted her dead. Adelaide tucked the journal back into her bag and rose carefully from the bed. The robe Jackson had mentioned was a faded blue flannel, far too large for her frame, but warm and clean. She wrapped it around herself, securing it with the belt, and made her way cautiously downstairs. Voices drifted from what appeared to be a sitting room, Jackson's measured tones and Meyer's more querulous timbre. Adelaide paused in the doorway, taking in the scene. The room was sparsely furnished but comfortable. A settee, 2 armchairs, a stone fireplace with a small fire crackling to ward off the autumn chill. Photographs lined the mantel, most featuring a pretty woman with dark hair and a solemn expression, sometimes accompanied by a small boy. Hannah and James Adelaide, presumed Jackson's wife and son, long gone. Meyer spotted her first. "Ah, the patient appears. Come in, child. Let's have a look at you." Adelaide entered hesitantly, self-conscious in the borrowed robe. Jackson rose, offering her his armchair, which was closest to the fire. "Samuel's brought his medical bag," he explained as she sat. "Standard procedure for fainting spells." The message was clear. Meyer didn't know about the gunshot wound, and Jackson was leaving it to her whether to reveal it. Meyer's examination was brief but thorough, checking her pulse, her eyes the color of her fingernails. Bit anemic, I'd say. Not eating properly. And there's a fever." He looked at her sternly over his spectacles. "Young lady, you've been pushing yourself too hard. Rest and good food are what you need." "Thank you, Dr. Meyer," Adelaide said, managing a small smile. "I appreciate your concern." "Samuel will do. Haven't been doctor in 30 years. He repacked his bag with arthritic fingers. "Now Jackson tells me you're looking for teaching work. Might be an opening at the school in Millbrook. Their teacher's expecting a baby due in December." Adelaide nodded, though teaching was the furthest thing from her mind. "That's good to know." "In the meantime," Jackson interjected, "Adelaide is welcome to stay here. I could use help around the place. The garden's gone wild since—" He broke off, a shadow crossing his face. "Well, it needs tending." Meyer's bushy eyebrows rose nearly to his hairline. "Here alone, Jackson. I know you've been out of society for some time, but surely you realize—" "Mrs. Peterson comes daily," Jackson said calmly. "And the bunkhouse is empty if Adelaide prefers more privacy. I'm offering employment, Sam, not impropriety." Meyer snorted. "Tell that to Eleanor Finch. She'll have the whole town thinking you've set up a love nest by sundown." Adelaide felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Perhaps it would be better if I found lodgings in Millbrook after all." "Nonsense," Jackson said firmly. "You're in no condition to travel, and Millbrook is 15 miles away." He turned to Meyer. "Sam, you've known me 20 years. Have I ever given anyone reason to question my character?" The old pharmacist sighed. "No, but people talk, Jackson, especially in a town with little else to entertain them." "Let them talk. I stopped caring what Pine Ridge thought of me a long time ago." There was such finality in his tone that Meyer merely shrugged. "Your choice. But don't say I didn't warn you." He rose stiffly. "I should get back. Left young Jenkins minding the shop, and God knows what he'll sell someone if left too long. Boy can't tell calamine from calomel." After Meyer departed, a heavy silence fell. Adelaide stared into the fire, aware of Jackson watching her from the settee. "You didn't tell him," she said finally. "Not my secret to tell." "Thank you." She hesitated. "But he's right. I can't stay here. Not just because of gossip. It's not safe for you." Jackson's expression remained impassive. "Because of whoever shot you." It wasn't a question, but Adelaide nodded anyway. "Yes." "Who was it, Adelaide? What kind of trouble are you running from? She closed her eyes briefly, gathering her courage. When she opened them, Jackson was still watching her, his gaze steady and patient. His name is Theodore Blackwell, she said quietly. Judge Theodore Blackwell of the Denver Circuit Court. He's respected, powerful, wealthy. Her voice hardened. And he's pure evil. Jackson didn't react to the force of her statement, merely nodded for her to continue. I worked as a nurse in his private hospital for unwed mothers. The lie came easily practiced over many tellings. At first I thought it was charitable work, but then I noticed patterns. Women would come in, give birth, and then both mother and child would disappear. The records would show they'd been placed in homes or work situations, but I could never verify these placements. You think they were being trafficked? Adelaide nodded. I'm certain of it, especially the colored women and children. They'd vanish without a trace. She swallowed hard. I started keeping records, names, dates, descriptions, and I began asking questions. Dangerous questions, Jackson surmised. Yes, Blackwell discovered my journal. She touched her bag protectively. He sent men to silence me. I managed to escape, but not before. She gestured vaguely toward her shoulder. So you ran to Pine Ridge, Jackson said thoughtfully. Why here? Why not to the authorities in Denver? Adelaide laughed bitterly. Blackwell is the authority in Denver. The police, the mayor, even some of the federal marshals, they're all in his pocket. Anyone I approached would just return me to him. And Pine Ridge, why come back after all these years? This was the moment Adelaide had dreaded, the question she couldn't answer honestly without revealing too much. She looked away, studying the photographs on the mantel. I remembered it as safe, she said finally. Quiet, off the main roads. Somewhere Blackwell might not think to look. She hesitated. And I remembered you. How kind you were that summer teaching me about herbs and healing. I thought, I hoped you might still be here. It wasn't a complete lie. She had remembered Jackson Hargrove with fondness, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Jackson seemed to sense her omission, but didn't press. Instead, he rose and added another log to the fire. You're welcome to stay as long as you need, he said, his back to her. The offer of work is genuine. Place could use a woman's touch. He turned, his expression unreadable. But I should warn you, I'm not the man you remember. War and loss change people. I'm not sure I remember how to be kind anymore. The raw honesty in his voice touched something in Adelaide. For the first time since arriving, she truly looked at him, not as the idealized figure from her childhood memories, but as he was now. A solitary man marked by grief, living in a house filled with ghosts. Perhaps, she said softly, we can remember together. A log shifted in the fireplace, sending up a shower of sparks. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling through the pines that surrounded the ranch. For a moment, they sat in silence, two wounded souls finding unexpected common ground. Then Jackson cleared his throat. You should rest. I'll bring up some broth later. Tomorrow, if you're feeling stronger, we can discuss what comes next. Adelaide nodded, rising carefully. Thank you, Jackson, for everything. As she climbed the stairs to the guest room, fatigue washed over her in waves. She was safe for the moment, but for how long? Blackwell's reach was long, his resources vast. And she hadn't told Jackson the whole truth. Lily and Isaiah were still out there hiding, waiting for her to return. Every day she delayed put them at greater risk. But in her current condition, she couldn't protect them any better than she could protect herself. For now, she would rest, gather her strength, and pray that Blackwell's men hadn't already picked up her trail. Night fell over Lone Star Ranch, bringing with it a chorus of crickets and the distant howl of coyotes. Jackson sat on the porch, nursing a cup of coffee laced with a splash of whiskey, his one concession to the turmoil of the day. Adelaide Winters, after all these years. He remembered her as a serious child with curious eyes and a mind that absorbed knowledge like a sponge. That summer, her father had brought the family to Pine Ridge to survey for mineral deposits. Adelaide had attached herself to Jackson, like a shadow following him on his rounds, pestering him with endless questions about plants and healing. He'd been amused by her persistence, then impressed by her intelligence. By summer's end, she could identify most medicinal herbs in his garden and recite their uses. She'd been heartbroken when her family departed for Denver. Now she was back, a woman grown wounded and hunted, and lying to him. Oh, parts of her story were true enough. The fear in her eyes when she spoke of Blackwell was genuine. The gunshot wound was real. But she was holding something back, something significant. Jackson sipped his coffee, considering. Whatever Adelaide's secrets, they were hers to keep or share. His responsibility was simpler. Provide shelter, medical care, and protection if needed. Beyond that, well, he'd see. A sound from inside the house caught his attention, a soft cry quickly muffled. Jackson set down his cup and rose, moving silently through the darkened house toward the guest room. The door was ajar. Inside, Adelaide thrashed beneath the quilt, her face contorted in distress. "No," she moaned. "Please don't. Lily, hide her." Jackson hesitated, unsure whether to wake her. Before he could decide, Adelaide bolted upright, her eyes wide with terror. "Lily," she gasped, reaching out as if to grasp something or someone. "Adelaide," Jackson said quietly from the doorway. "It's all right. You're safe." She turned toward his voice, her expression disoriented, still half caught in whatever nightmare had gripped her. "Jackson, where's Lily? Did they find her?" "There's no one here but us," he assured her, entering the room. "You were dreaming." Awareness returned to her eyes, followed by relief and then wariness. "I'm sorry. Did I wake you?" "I was still up." Jackson sat in the rocking chair beside the bed. "Who's Lily?" Adelaide's face closed like a shutter. "No one, just someone from the hospital. A patient I was worried about." Another lie. Jackson let it pass. "The fever's making you restless. I'll brew some willow bark tea. It will help with both the fever and the pain." As he rose to leave, Adelaide caught his wrist. Her fingers were surprisingly strong despite her weakened state. "Jackson," she said, her voice low and urgent. "If anyone comes looking for me, anyone, you must tell them you haven't seen me, for your own safety." He covered her hand with his own. "I've lived through a war, Adelaide. I can handle whatever trouble follows you here." She shook her head, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You don't understand. Blackwell isn't just powerful, he's obsessed. He believes he's doing God's work. Men like that, they destroy everything in their path." "Then it's fortunate I don't have much left to destroy," Jackson said quietly. He gently removed her hand from his wrist. "Rest, I'll bring the tea." As he descended to the kitchen, Jackson's mind turned over Adelaide's words. Lily, a child perhaps. Someone Adelaide was protecting. It would explain much her determination despite injury, her constant worry. In the kitchen, he set water to boil and prepared a mixture of willow bark and chamomile. The familiar motions of preparing medicine brought back memories of his medical practice, the satisfaction of easing pain, of making a difference. He'd abandoned that part of himself after Hannah and James died. The doctor who couldn't save his own family had no business trying to save others. But now, mixing herbs for Adelaide, he felt an echo of his former purpose. Jackson carried the steaming mug upstairs, only to find Adelaide asleep once more, her breathing steady and deep. The nightmare's grip had loosened. He set the tea on the bedside table and was turning to leave when something caught his eye. Adelaide's traveling bag had fallen from the bed, spilling its contents onto the floor. Among them was a leather-bound journal open to a page filled with neat, precise handwriting. Jackson didn't mean to read it, but a name leaped out at him: Blackwell. Against his better judgment, he bent to examine the page. It contained what appeared to be a ledger entry listing payments for acquisition and processing of units. The amounts were substantial, hundreds of dollars per unit. Below the ledger was a note in Adelaide's handwriting, cross-referenced with missing persons. All women and children, primarily colored. Patterns suggest trafficking to Mexico and Caribbean plantations. Jackson carefully closed the journal and returned it to Adelaide's bag, his mind racing. If what he'd glimpsed was accurate, Adelaide wasn't just running from a vindictive employer. She was carrying evidence of a human trafficking operation run by one of Colorado's most powerful men. No wonder she was terrified. No wonder she'd been shot. As he straightened, Adelaide stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "Did you read it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. There was no point in lying. "One page, by accident." She closed her eyes briefly. "Now you understand why he wants me dead." "Yes." Jackson picked up the mug of tea, now cooled to drinking temperature, and handed it to her. "Drink this, then we'll talk about what happens next." Adelaide sipped the tea obediently, grimacing at its bitter taste. "There is no next for you, Jackson. Once I'm stronger, I'll go." You've already done more than enough. And where will you go? He asked reasonably. You said yourself Blackwell controls Denver. You have little money, no friends nearby, and a wound that needs proper healing. I'll manage. But her voice lacked conviction. Adelaide, Jackson said gently, whatever you're running from, whatever you're not telling me, it's all right. But you need help. Let me provide it. She studied him over the rim of her mug, her green eyes wary in the lamplight. Why? Why would you risk yourself for someone you barely know? It was a fair question, one Jackson had been asking himself since bringing her to Lone Star. The answer came to him suddenly with surprising clarity. Because for the first time in 7 years, he said quietly, I have a reason to get up in the morning that isn't just habit. The simple honesty of his response seemed to startle her. Adelaide set down the mug, her hands trembling slightly. There's more, she admitted. More than what I told you, but I can't. Not yet. Not until I'm sure. Sure of what? That I haven't led them straight to you. She met his gaze directly. Give me 2 days. If no one comes looking by then, I'll tell you everything. I promise. Jackson considered her offer. 2 days was reasonable enough time for her to regain some strength, for him to prepare whatever defenses might be needed. All right, he agreed. 2 days, but in return you follow doctor's orders. Rest, proper meals, no sneaking off in the night. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. You drive a hard bargain, Dr. Hargrove. Jackson, he corrected again. Jackson, she echoed softly. Then unexpectedly she reached out and squeezed his hand. Thank you, not just for the shelter and medical care, for believing me. The simple gesture of gratitude caught him off guard. How long had it been since he'd experienced human touch beyond the occasional handshake? Years, certainly. The warmth of her fingers against his was both foreign and achingly familiar. Get some sleep, he said gently, withdrawing his hand. Dawn comes early on a ranch. As he left the room, closing the door behind him, Jackson acknowledged a troubling truth. Despite her secrets, despite the danger she brought with her, Adelaide Winters had awakened something in him that he'd thought long dead, a desire to protect, to care, to connect. And that perhaps was the most dangerous development of all. On the second night of Adelaide's stay at Lone Star Ranch, Jackson woke to the sound of Samson nickering restlessly in the corral. The buckskin was a steady mount, not given to midnight alarms without cause. Jackson slipped from bed, pulling on trousers and boots. From beneath his pillow, he retrieved his revolver, a Colt Peacemaker that had seen him through the latter half of the war. Its weight was familiar in his hand as he moved silently through the darkened house. Adelaide's door was open, her bed empty. A cold knot formed in Jackson's stomach. Had she fled after all? Or had something or someone taken her? Moonlight streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Jackson checked the kitchen and sitting room, finding no sign of disturbance. The front door was closed but unlocked. Outside, the October night was crisp and clear, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. Jackson scanned the yard, noting hoofprints in the soft earth near the corral, fresh ones heading toward the pine forest that bordered the northern edge of his property. Adelaide had taken a horse. But why and where was she going at this hour? Following his instincts, Jackson saddled Samson and set out after her, tracking by moonlight. The trail was clear enough. Adelaide had made no attempt to hide her passage. She was either confident she wouldn't be followed or too desperate to care. The path led deeper into the pines, following a game trail that wound through the underbrush. After about 2 miles, Jackson spotted a flicker of light ahead, a small fire carefully banked to minimize visibility. He dismounted, tethering Samson to a pine sapling, and approached on foot, moving silently through the forest as he'd learned to do during the war. Voices carried on the still night air, Adelaide's low and urgent, and another younger voice that rose and fell with emotion. Can't stay here much longer, the unknown speaker was saying. Supplies are running low and Lily's getting restless. I know, Isaiah, Adelaide responded, her tone soothing, but we need to be careful. If Blackwell's men find us, they won't, the boy Isaiah insisted. I've been careful just like you taught me. Nobody followed me to town and I only bought a little at a time from different stores. Jackson edged closer, trying to get a better view without revealing his presence. The scene before him was unexpected. Adelaide, wrapped in a borrowed shawl, sat on a fallen log beside a slender boy of about 14. His dark skin gleamed in the firelight, his expression earnest as he spoke. Nearby, a crude lean-to had been constructed against a large boulder. Inside, Jackson glimpsed a small form wrapped in blankets, a child sleeping. "How is she?" Adelaide asked, nodding toward the lean-to. "Better. The fever broke yesterday." Isaiah's voice softened. "She asks for you every day, wants to know when we can all be together again." Adelaide's shoulders slumped. "Soon, I hope. I've found someone who might help us. A doctor, the one I told you about from when I was a child." "Can we trust him?" Isaiah's skepticism was evident even from a distance. "I think so." Adelaide sounded weary but determined. "He's a good man, lonely, damaged, but good at heart. That's what you said about Reverend Mitchell, and he sold us out to Blackwell within a day. This is different. Dr. Hargrove has no connection to Blackwell, and he already knows parts of the truth. But not about us," Isaiah pointed out. "Not about Lily." "Not yet," Adelaide admitted. "I wanted to be sure it was safe first." The conversation confirmed Jackson's suspicions. Adelaide wasn't just running for her own safety, she was protecting these children, keeping them hidden, while she sought help. He shifted his weight and a twig snapped beneath his boot. The sound, though small, was enough. Isaiah sprang to his feet with the alertness of a hunted animal drawing a knife from his belt. "Someone's there," he hissed, positioning himself between Adelaide and the threat. Jackson stepped into the clearing, keeping his hands visible, his revolver holstered. "It's just me," he said calmly. "Jackson Hargrove." Adelaide's face drained of color. "Jackson, how did you left tracks a blind man could follow," he said without accusation. "Fortunately, it was me who found them, not someone else." Isaiah remained tense, the knife still gripped in his hand. "How do we know he wasn't followed?" "I wasn't," Jackson assured him. "I've spent enough time in these woods to know when I'm being tracked." He looked past the boy to the lean-to. "Is that Lily? The one you called for in your sleep?" Adelaide nodded slowly. "Yes, she's 6 years old. Isaiah is 14. They're why I came back to Pine Ridge." "Why didn't you bring them to the ranch?" Jackson asked. "Why keep them out here in the cold?" "Because I didn't know if I could trust you," Adelaide said simply. "I had to be sure." Jackson accepted this with a nod, and now she hesitated, looking to Isaiah, who still watched Jackson warily. "Now, I think we have no choice." She turned back to Jackson. "If we come with you, can you guarantee their safety? Even if it means standing against Blackwell and his men." It was a serious question, deserving a serious answer. Jackson considered what he knew: a powerful judge running a human trafficking ring, willing to kill to protect his operation. Against that, a wounded woman and 2 vulnerable children. The odds weren't good. But something about Adelaide's quiet determination, about the fierce protectiveness in Isaiah's stance, stirred embers Jackson had thought long cold. "Yes," he said finally. "I can't promise we'll win, but I can promise I'll fight. For all of you." And Adelaide's relief was visible, her shoulders sagging, as if a great weight had been lifted. "Thank you," she whispered. Isaiah remained skeptical. "How do we know we can trust him, Miss Adelaide? He could be working for Blackwell." "He's not," Adelaide said with quiet certainty. "I've known him since I was a child. If there's one man in Colorado we can trust, it's Jackson Hargrove." Her faith, though likely misplaced, moved something in Jackson's chest. It had been a long time since anyone had believed in him so completely. "We should move now," he said, all business. "The lean-to is well hidden, but not enough if Blackwell's men are actively searching these woods." Adelaide nodded. "Isaiah, wake Lily. Pack only what we need." As the boy reluctantly obeyed, Adelaide approached Jackson, her expression troubled. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you everything from the start. I had to protect them." "I understand," Jackson said, and he did. In her position, he'd have done the same. "But from now on, complete honesty. I can't help if I don't know what we're facing." "Agreed." She hesitated. "There's one more thing you should know. Lily is special. Different." "Different how?" Adelaide glanced toward the lean-to where Isaiah was gently rousing the little girl. "She's colored. Her parents were freed slaves who worked for my father's mining company. When they died in a tunnel collapse, I became her guardian." Her voice hardened. "Blackwell believes people like Lily belong in chains. He runs an organization called the Heritage Restoration Society, influential men who think emancipation was a mistake." Jackson's jaw tightened. He'd seen the brutality of slavery firsthand during the war, had treated men and women whose bodies bore the scars of that peculiar institution. The thought of anyone trying to resurrect it in any form filled him with cold fury. "No one's putting chains on anyone at Lone Star," he said firmly. "Not while I'm breathing." Adelaide's smile was small but genuine. "That's what I hoped you'd say." Isaiah emerged from the lean-to, leading a small, sleepy-eyed girl wrapped in a woolen blanket. Lily was tiny for 6, with warm brown skin, curly black hair, and eyes that seemed too old for her young face. She blinked up at Jackson without fear, merely curiosity. "Are you the giant?" she asked in a clear, sweet voice. Jackson blinked, surprised. "The giant from Miss Adelaide's stories," Lily explained patiently as if to a slow child. "The kind giant who saved her from the bear." Adelaide looked embarrassed. "I might have embellished some childhood memories for bedtime stories." Despite the gravity of the situation, Jackson felt a smile tug at his lips. "No, little one. I'm not a giant, just a man named Jackson." Lily considered this, then nodded solemnly. "You're very tall for a not giant." It was the first moment of genuine levity Jackson had experienced in longer than he could remember. Even Isaiah's stern expression softened slightly. "We need to go," Adelaide said, gathering their meager belongings. "It's a long ride back to the ranch." Jackson helped them pack, noting how few possessions the 3 fugitives had between them. Some spare clothing, a few books, Isaiah's knife, and Lily's prized possession, a handmade doll with button eyes and yarn hair. "This is Daisy," Lily informed Jackson seriously as they prepared to leave. "She's coming with us." "Of course she is," Jackson agreed, hoisting the little girl onto his horse. "Everyone needs a friend on a journey." With Adelaide riding double with Isaiah on the horse she'd borrowed, they set off through the moonlit forest toward Lone Star Ranch. Jackson led the way, Lily perched before him, chattering softly about Daisy's adventures. As they rode, Jackson's mind turned over this new development. 1 woman and 2 children, hunted by a powerful, vindictive man with seemingly limitless resources. The odds against them were steep. But for the first time in 7 years, Jackson Hargrove had a purpose beyond mere existence. Someone needed him, not just his medical skills or his shelter, but his protection, his strength, his willingness to stand between the vulnerable and those who would harm them. It felt, he realized with mild surprise, like waking up after a very long sleep. Dawn broke over Lone Star Ranch in ribbons of pink and gold, illuminating the dew-laden grass and the weathered buildings of the homestead. Jackson stood on the porch, a steaming mug of coffee in his hand, watching as the world emerged from shadow into light. Behind him, the house was alive with unfamiliar sounds, the clatter of dishes in the kitchen, a child's high, sweet voice asking questions, Adelaide's patient answers. After years of silence, the sudden intrusion of life into his solitary existence was both jarring and strangely comforting. The back door opened and Isaiah stepped out, his dark eyes wary as they always were when regarding Jackson. The boy carried himself like someone accustomed to watching his back, his movements precise and controlled, even in simple tasks like bringing firewood or feeding the horses. "Miss Adelaide says breakfast is nearly ready," he said, his voice carefully neutral. Jackson nodded. "Thank you." Isaiah lingered, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, clearly wrestling with something. Finally, he spoke again. "I checked the perimeter like you asked. No sign anyone's been around." "Good." Jackson sipped his coffee. "Though we shouldn't get comfortable. Blackwell's men will come eventually." "Yes, sir." Isaiah hesitated again. "Miss Adelaide, she says you were a doctor during the war." "I was." "For the Union?" Jackson studied the boy over the rim of his mug. "Yes. Does that matter to you?" Isaiah's expression was unreadable. "My father fought for the Union. 54th Massachusetts. He died at Fort Wagner." Understanding dawned. Isaiah wasn't just a boy Adelaide had taken under her wing. He was the son of a Union soldier, a colored man who had died fighting for freedom. "The 54th was a good regiment," Jackson said quietly. "Brave men. I treated some of them after Wagner." Something in Isaiah's posture eased slightly, a tension releasing. "My mother told me he died free, fighting for something that mattered." "He did." Jackson set down his coffee mug. "And what he fought for is worth protecting still." Isaiah nodded, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Then without another word, he turned and went back inside. Jackson remained on the porch a moment longer, watching the sun climb higher over the pine-covered hills. He'd made a promise last night to protect Adelaide and these children from whatever threat Blackwell posed. A promise he wasn't entirely sure he could keep. But for the first time in years, keeping a promise felt like something worth living for. Inside the kitchen was transformed. Adelaide moved about with quiet efficiency, setting a pot of oatmeal to simmer on the stove while Lily sat at the table, carefully arranging silverware with the solemn concentration only a child can bring to such a task. "The forks go on the left," she informed Jackson as he entered. "Miss Adelaide says it's proper." "So it is," Jackson agreed, taking his customary seat at the head of the table. The domestic scene before him was so achingly reminiscent of breakfast with Hannah and James that for a moment he couldn't speak. Adelaide seemed to sense his discomfort. "I hope you don't mind," she said, gesturing to the kitchen. "I thought I should earn my keep." "No, it's fine." Jackson cleared his throat. "It's good to see the kitchen being used properly again." Breakfast was a simple affair, oatmeal sweetened with the last of Jackson's honey bread toasted over the fire and coffee for the adults. Throughout the meal, Jackson observed the unusual family Adelaide had assembled. Isaiah remained watchful, positioned near the window where he could see anyone approaching. Lily chattered happily, seemingly unburdened by their precarious situation. And Adelaide moved between them like a compass needle, finding north, always aware of their needs, anticipating and addressing them before they were voiced. They were survivors, all three of them, each carrying wounds visible or hidden, each finding strength in their connection to the others. As Adelaide cleared the dishes, Jackson unfolded a map of the region on the table. "We need to talk strategy," he said. "Blackwell won't give up easily. We need to be prepared when his men come." Adelaide returned to the table, her expression grave. "Lily," she said gently, "why don't you take Daisy outside and show her the garden? Stay where we can see you from the window." The little girl nodded solemnly, clutching her doll to her chest as she left through the back door. Isaiah moved to stand by the window, keeping her in sight while still participating in the conversation. "Blackwell has resources," Adelaide began once Lily was out of earshot. "Money influenced men willing to do his bidding without question. His Heritage Restoration Society includes judges, lawmakers, wealthy businessmen, people who believe the old ways were better." "Slavers," Isaiah said flatly. "Yes, though they'd never use that word. They call it managed labor or appropriate placement." Adelaide's voice was bitter. "The hospital where I worked was part of their operation. They'd identify vulnerable women, usually colored but sometimes poor whites with no family or connections. Women who wouldn't be missed." Jackson leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "And you discovered this," how Adelaide's gaze dropped to her hands, which were twisted together on the tabletop. "I was hired as a nurse. My qualifications were exaggerated. My father had taught me some basic medical care for the mining camps, and I'd read medical texts, but I was hardly trained. Still, Blackwell's hospital didn't require actual medical skills as much as compliance." "You were supposed to look the other boy," Jackson surmised. "Yes, and I did at first." Shame colored her voice. "I told myself it wasn't my business, that I needed the position. Then I met Isaiah's mother." Isaiah's expression tightened, but he remained silent, staring out the window at Lily. "Martha was brought in hemorrhaging after a difficult birth," Adelaide continued. "She'd been working as a laundress at a hotel in Denver when her labor started. The hotel sent her to Blackwell's hospital because she couldn't pay for proper care." "Was the baby—" Jackson didn't finish the question. "Stillborn," Isaiah said tonelessly, still watching Lily. "A girl. Would have been my sister." Adelaide reached across the table, covering Jackson's hand with her own. "Martha knew she was dying. She made me promise to find Isaiah to keep him safe. He'd been staying with neighbors while she worked, but she was afraid Blackwell would take him too." "And Lily?" Jackson asked. "Her parents worked for my father's company. Good people. When they died in a tunnel collapse, my father took responsibility for Lily. She lived with us until his death 5 years ago. Then she became my charge." Jackson studied the map, his mind working through the implications. "So Blackwell isn't just after you for the evidence in your journal. He wants the children too." Adelaide nodded, her expression grim. "Especially Lily. She's young enough to be placed somewhere far away where no one would ever find her." The thought of that bright, curious child being sold into servitude made Jackson's blood run cold. "That's not going to happen," he said, the steel in his voice surprising even himself. "Blackwell won't stop," Isaiah warned, turning from the window. He'll burn down this whole valley to get what he wants. Then we need to be ready. Jackson traced a line on the map. The ranch is defensible, good sight lines, limited approaches. We can see anyone coming from a mile away, but we need supplies, ammunition, and allies. Who would stand with us against Blackwell? Adelaide asked. You said yourself Pine Ridge is a dying town. People have their own troubles. Jackson considered the question. Harvey Parker might. He's no friend to men like Blackwell. Samuel Meyer too, though he's too old for a fight. Perhaps a few others. He sighed. It's not much, but it's a start. We should leave, Isaiah insisted. Head north to Wyoming or west to California, somewhere Blackwell can't reach. With what resources? Jackson asked practically. Adelaide's wounded, Lily's too young for hard travel, winter's coming, and Blackwell's network is extensive. How far would we get before his men found us? The boy's shoulders slumped, acknowledging the truth of Jackson's assessment. So we wait for them to come to us. We prepare, Jackson corrected, and we look for opportunities. Blackwell may be powerful, but he's not invincible. Every man has weaknesses. Adelaide's green eyes met his, a spark of hope kindling in their depths. What do you suggest? Jackson rose, moving to a drawer in the kitchen sideboard. From it, he withdrew a battered ledger book. First, we make an inventory. What we have, what we need. Then I'll go to town, speak with Parker, get supplies. I should come with you, Adelaide said. It's too dangerous for you to be associated with us openly. More dangerous for you to be seen, Jackson countered. If Blackwell's men are watching Pine Ridge, you'd be recognized immediately. She couldn't argue with that logic. Be careful, she said instead. And thank you for all of this. Jackson merely nodded, uncomfortable with gratitude he wasn't sure he deserved. He hadn't chosen this fight. It had arrived on his doorstep with Adelaide. But now that it was here, he found himself strangely energized by it. After years of merely existing, he was finally living again with purpose, with direction, even if that purpose might get him killed. Pine Ridge was unusually busy when Jackson arrived late that morning. A hailstorm had swept through the valley the previous night, damaging crops and roofs, and farmers from the surrounding homesteads had come to town for repairs and supplies. The mercantile was crowded with people buying nails, canvas, and other necessities. Jackson tethered Sampson outside Meyer's pharmacy where he could observe the town without being obvious about it. From his vantage point, he noted two strangers lingering near the stage depot, well-dressed men who didn't fit the profile of local farmers or laborers. They watched the comings and goings with too much interest, occasionally exchanging quiet words. Blackwell's men, Jackson guessed. Already here, already watching. He entered the pharmacy, the bell above the door announcing his presence. Meyer looked up from his mortar and pestle, his rheumy eyes brightening at the sight of Jackson. Twice in 1 week, the old pharmacist remarked. Must be my lucky days. How's your guest faring? Jackson closed the door behind him, ensuring they wouldn't be overheard. Better, the rest is doing her good. Meyer's bushy eyebrows rose suggestively. Just rest is it Eleanor Finch has been telling anyone who will listen that you've set up a love nest out at Lone Star. Despite the seriousness of the situation, Jackson felt a flush of annoyance. Mrs. Finch should mind her own business. That'll be the day. Meyer set aside his work and fixed Jackson with a penetrating stare. Now what really brings you to town? Can't be my sparkling conversation. Jackson hesitated, weighing how much to reveal. Meyer was trustworthy, but he was also old and vulnerable. Involving him too deeply could put him at risk. I need supplies, he said finally. Medical supplies for Adelaide's condition. Meyer's gaze sharpened. Condition, eh? Would that be the gunshot wound you didn't mention when I examined her? Jackson shouldn't have been surprised. Meyer might be old, but his mind was still keen. You knew, suspected, the way she held herself, the fever that didn't match simple exhaustion. Meyer shook his head. What have you gotten yourself into, Jackson? It's complicated. It always is with pretty women and bullets. Meyer sighed heavily. What do you need? Jackson produced a list from his pocket. Everything here. And information. There are strangers in town. 2 men by the stage depot. Know anything about them? Meyer's expression grew somber. Arrived yesterday. Asked a lot of questions about recent arrivals, especially women traveling alone. Claimed to be looking for a runaway wife, but I didn't believe it for a minute. He lowered his voice further. They showed Eleanor a photograph. She says it was Adelaide. Jackson's stomach tightened. So they were already here, already closing in. Did she tell them anything? What do you think Eleanor Finch never met a piece of gossip she didn't spread like butter on hot bread? Told them all about you taking Adelaide to Lone Star. Damn, Jackson muttered. Indeed. Meyer began gathering items from Jackson's list. They haven't made a move yet, though. Seem to be waiting for something, or someone. That was concerning. If Blackwell's men knew where Adelaide was but hadn't acted, it suggested they were waiting for reinforcements. Or for Blackwell himself. Any other strangers in town? Jackson asked. Not that I've noticed, but Harvey might know more. He's been keeping an eye on those two since they arrived. Jackson nodded. I'll find him next. How much for the supplies? Meyer waved a dismissive hand. Consider it payment for all the times you patched up my gout. But Jackson, the old man's voice grew serious. Whatever trouble that girl's in, it's bigger than you. Be careful. I will. Jackson packed the medical supplies into his saddlebags. And Sam, if things go badly, if you hear about trouble at Lone Star, I'll ring the church bell, Meyer promised. Every able-bodied man in Pine Ridge will come running. Jackson doubted that. Most of Pine Ridge's residents were too concerned with their own struggles to intervene in someone else's fight, but he appreciated the sentiment nonetheless. Thank you, he said, gripping the old pharmacist's shoulder briefly before heading back onto the street. Harvey Parker was emerging from the sheriff's office as Jackson approached. The deputy looked tired, dark circles under his eyes, suggesting a sleepless night. Jackson, he greeted, his voice pitched low, and was hoping you'd come to town today. Need to talk to you. About the strangers, Jackson guessed. Parker nodded, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. Not here. Meet me behind the livery in 10 minutes. Jackson agreed and made his way to the mercantile where he purchased ammunition, canned goods, and other supplies they'd need if Lone Star came under siege. Throughout his shopping, he was acutely aware of being watched. The two men from the stage depot had separated, one lingering outside the mercantile, while the other positioned himself near Jackson's horse. They weren't even trying to be subtle anymore. They wanted him to know he was being observed. With his purchases secured in Sampson's saddlebags, Jackson made his way around behind the livery stable. Parker was already waiting, smoking a cigarette with nervous energy. Those men are watching you, the deputy said without preamble. I noticed. They're armed, professionals by the look of them, ex-military maybe. Jackson leaned against the stable wall, keeping his voice low. They're looking for Adelaide Winters. I gathered that much. Parker flicked his cigarette away, grinding it under his boot. What I don't know is why or how you're involved. There was no point in prevaricating. Harvey Parker was one of the few men in Pine Ridge that Jackson genuinely respected, a fellow veteran who understood that sometimes justice and the law weren't the same thing. She's at Lone Star, Jackson admitted, along with two children she's protecting. They're running from a man named Theodore Blackwell, judge out of Denver. Parker's eyebrows rose. Judge Blackwell's one who's always giving speeches about traditional values and restoring proper order. The same. He's running a human trafficking operation disguised as a charity hospital. Adelaide discovered it, gathered evidence. Now he wants her silenced. Parker let out a low whistle. That's one hell of a hornet's nest you've kicked, my friend. I didn't kick it. It landed on my doorstep. Jackson studied Parker's face, looking for signs of disbelief or doubt. He found none. You believe me? I believe there are powerful men doing terrible things behind closed doors. I believe Adelaide Winters doesn't strike me as the type to run without good reason. Parker shrugged. And I believe you wouldn't get involved unless you were damn sure it was the right thing to do. Relief washed through Jackson. Having even one ally made their situation feel marginally less hopeless. What can you tell me about the men watching me? He asked. The older one is James Mercer. Ex-Pinkerton, now works as a private investigator for wealthy clients. Has a reputation for being thorough and discreet. The younger one I don't know by name, but I've seen his type before. Hired muscle, probably ex-military. Dangerous, very, and they're just the advance team. Parker lowered his voice further. Word at the telegraph office is that Judge Blackwell himself is arriving on tomorrow's stage, with more men. This confirmed Jackson's fears. Blackwell was coming personally to deal with Adelaide. The situation was escalating faster than they'd anticipated. How many men can you muster if things go bad? Jackson asked. Parker grimaced. Officially none. Sheriff Tanner's in Denver for his daughter's wedding. Left me in charge, but with strict instructions not to create any incidents. He sighed. Unofficially, maybe 5 or 6 who'd stand with us. Most folks in Pine Ridge just want to keep their heads down. 5 or 6 might be enough if they're the right 5 or 6. I'll do what I can. Parker straightened his expression resolute. But Jackson, you need to know something. These men, they've been asking about your place specifically. About the layout, the approaches. They're planning something. Tonight? Possibly. They seem to be waiting for instructions. Parker glanced toward the street. I'd get back to Lone Star if I were you. Prepare your defenses. Jackson nodded, gripping Parker's arm in thanks. If you hear gunfire from the direction of Lone Star, I'll come running, Parker promised, with whoever I can bring. As Jackson mounted Samson and rode out of Pine Ridge, he was conscious of the 2 men watching his departure. They made no move to follow him, which was concerning in its own way. They knew where he was going. They knew where Adelaide was, and they were content to wait. The hailstorm had left the road muddy and treacherous in places, slowing Jackson's progress back to the ranch. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, promising more bad weather before nightfall. The air felt heavy, charged with electricity, as if the very atmosphere were preparing for conflict. Jackson pushed Samson as fast as the conditions allowed, a sense of urgency growing with each passing mile. He'd been gone too long. Adelaide and the children were alone, vulnerable. If Blackwell's men decided to move before their employer arrived, Lone Star Ranch came into view just as the first fat raindrops began to fall. Jackson scanned the property, alert for signs of intruders or disturbance. Nothing seemed amiss. Smoke rose from the chimney, the horses grazed peacefully in the corral. The windows glowed with lamplight against the darkening day. Adelaide met him at the door, her face tight with worry. You're back, she said, relief evident in her voice. I was starting to fear. Blackwell's men are in Pine Ridge, Jackson interrupted, removing his rain-slicked coat. 2 of them watching the town, and Blackwell himself is expected on tomorrow's stage. Adelaide paled, one hand rising to her throat. So soon I thought we'd have more time. Time for what? Isaiah appeared in the doorway to the kitchen, Lily peering around him with curious eyes. Blackwell is coming, Adelaide said, her voice steady despite her evident fear. Tomorrow. Isaiah's jaw tightened. Then we should leave, now tonight. In this, Jackson gestured toward the windows where rain now lashed against the glass. With a wounded woman and a 6-year-old child, we'd be lucky to make it 5 miles before exposure got us. Or Blackwell's men. So we just wait here to be taken, Isaiah demanded. No, Jackson said firmly. We prepare. The ranch is defensible. We have supplies, weapons, and the advantage of position. If they come tonight, we'll be ready. If they wait for Blackwell tomorrow, that gives us time to strengthen our defenses. Adelaide looked between the 2 males, then made a decision. Isaiah, take Lily upstairs. Show her the quilt patterns in Hannah's sewing room. It will keep her occupied. The boy clearly wanted to protest, but one look at Lily's anxious face changed his mind. He nodded, taking the little girl's hand. Come on, Lilybug. Let's go look at the pretty patterns. Once they were gone, Adelaide turned to Jackson. Tell me everything. What did you learn in town? Jackson related his conversations with Meyer and Parker as he unpacked the supplies he'd purchased. Adelaide listened without interruption, her expression growing graver with each detail. So they know I'm here, she said when he finished, and they're waiting for Blackwell before making their move. It appears so, but that could change at any moment. We need to be prepared. Adelaide nodded, her practical nature asserting itself. What do we need to do? First, secure the house, board up the ground floor windows, move furniture to create barriers if they breach the doors. Then inventory our weapons and distribute them where they'll be most useful. I can shoot, Adelaide offered. My father taught me, though it's been some time. Isaiah, yes, though I prefer he focus on protecting Lily if it comes to that. Jackson noted the resolve in her voice. Despite her injury and the overwhelming odds against them, Adelaide showed no sign of surrendering. It was a quality he'd admired in his best soldiers during the war, the ability to face impossible situations with calm determination. There's something else we should discuss, he said, setting aside a box of ammunition. If the worst happens, if we're overrun, there needs to be an escape route, for you and the children. Adelaide's eyes flashed. I won't leave you to face them alone. This isn't about heroics, Adelaide. It's about survival. Lily and Isaiah need you. If I can buy you time to get away. No. Her voice was iron. I've spent too long running. Too long watching others pay the price for my choices. We stand together, or not at all. Jackson recognized the futility of arguing further. Adelaide had made her decision and nothing he could say would sway her. It was both admirable and intensely frustrating. At least promise me you'll get the children to safety if things go badly, he insisted. To this she nodded. Of course. Lily and Isaiah are my first priority. Always. Outside, thunder rolled across the valley and the rain intensified. Jackson moved to the window, peering through the gathering gloom toward the road from Pine Ridge. No sign of riders yet, but the weather would provide excellent cover for an approach under darkness. We should eat, Adelaide said practically. Gather our strength while we can. I made a stew earlier. It was such a mundane statement in the face of impending violence that Jackson almost smiled. Trust Adelaide to think of physical needs even as danger closed in around them. They ate in the kitchen, a strangely domestic scene despite the circumstances. Lily chattered about the quilt patterns she'd discovered, seemingly oblivious to the tension around her. Isaiah remained vigilant, his dark eyes constantly moving to the windows, ears attuned to any sound that might signal approach. Adelaide maintained a calm facade for the children's sake, though Jackson noted how she barely touched her food. After the meal, they began preparing the house for potential attack. Jackson showed Isaiah how to board up windows, while Adelaide created a makeshift infirmary in the upstairs hallway, laying out bandages and medicines in neat rows. Lily was given the task of filling water buckets, a job that kept her occupied and feeling useful without exposing her to the grimmer aspects of their preparations. As night fell, the storm showed no signs of abating. Rain pounded against the roof and wind howled through the pines surrounding the ranch. It was weather that would keep most men indoors, huddled near their fires. But Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that it also provided perfect cover for those motivated enough to brave the elements. We should take shifts watching, he suggested as they gathered in the sitting room after completing their preparations. 2 hours each. I'll take the first watch. Adelaide nodded. I'll take the second. Isaiah can take the third. I don't need sleep, the boy protested. I can watch all night. You need rest to be sharp, Jackson said firmly. All of us do. Isaiah looked ready to argue further, but Adelaide placed a gentle hand on his arm. He's right, Isaiah. We'll need our wits about us tomorrow. Reluctantly, the boy agreed. Lily had already fallen asleep on the settee, exhausted by the day's activities and blissfully unaware of the danger surrounding them. Adelaide carefully lifted her, carrying her upstairs to the guest room they shared. Left alone with Jackson, Isaiah finally asked the question that had clearly been weighing on him. Do you really think we can win against Blackwell and his men? It was a moment for honesty, not false reassurance. I think we have a chance, Jackson said carefully. Not a good one, but a chance. And sometimes that's all you need. Isaiah studied him, seeming to weigh his words. During the war, he said finally, did you ever fight in battles you knew you couldn't win? Yes. Jackson's mind flashed back to blood-soaked fields, to hopeless charges and desperate last stands. More than once. How did you keep going, knowing you might die for nothing? It was a profound question from one so young, and it deserved a thoughtful answer. Jackson considered before responding. It was never for nothing, he said slowly. Even in defeat, there's meaning in standing for what's right, in refusing to surrender to evil even when victory seems impossible. He met Isaiah's gaze directly. Your father understood that when he joined the 54th Massachusetts, that some principles are worth dying for. The boy absorbed this, his expression solemn beyond his years, like protecting Lily and Miss Adelaide. Yes, exactly like that. A moment of understanding passed between them, man and boy, separated by years and experience, but united in purpose. Then Isaiah nodded once, a gesture of respect, and went upstairs to rest. Jackson moved to the front window, peering out into the storm-lashed darkness. The rain had turned the yard to mud, and wind bent the pines surrounding the house like supplicants at prayer. It was a night for ghosts and memories, for reckoning with choices made and paths not taken. In the flickering lamplight, Jackson caught his reflection in the window glass, a man he barely recognized anymore. The young doctor who'd gone to war full of idealism and certainty had long since vanished, replaced by this weathered, solitary rancher with shadows in his eyes. But perhaps that younger self wasn't entirely gone. Perhaps he'd merely been dormant, waiting for a cause worth awakening for. Adelaide's soft footsteps on the stairs broke his reverie. She joined him at the window, her presence a warm counterpoint to the cold storm beyond the glass. "Lily's asleep," she said quietly. "Isaiah too, though he fought it." "He's a good boy," Jackson observed. "Brave. Loyal." "Yes." Adelaide's smile was tinged with sadness. "Too brave sometimes. Too willing to put himself at risk for others. Like someone else I know." She acknowledged the gentle rebuke with a slight tilt of her head. "We protect those we love. It's as simple and as complicated as that." They stood in companionable silence for a time, watching the storm rage beyond the window. Jackson was acutely aware of Adelaide beside him, the subtle scent of lavender that clung to her hair, the steady rhythm of her breathing, the way the lamplight gilded her profile in warm gold. "Why did you really come back to Pine Ridge?" he asked finally. "Of all the places you could have run to, why here?" Adelaide didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was soft with memory. "Do you remember that summer when I was 11, when my father brought us here while he surveyed the mines? I remember a curious girl who followed me everywhere asking endless questions about herbs and healing." She smiled. "I wanted to be just like you, the kind doctor who knew every plant in the valley, who could ease pain with gentle hands and quiet words." Her smile faded. "After my parents died and after I took responsibility for Lily, I often thought about that summer, about the sense of safety I felt here, the feeling that nothing truly bad could happen in a place so beautiful with people so kind." "Pine Ridge has changed," Jackson said. "So have I." "Yes, but some things remain the same." Adelaide turned to face him fully. "When I discovered what Blackwell was doing, when I realized I had to run, I thought of you. I remembered how you once told me that healing wasn't just about mending bodies, but about protecting the vulnerable, standing between them and harm." Her words struck a chord deep within Jackson, a memory of the idealistic young doctor he'd once been, full of principles and purpose. "I've failed at that more often than I've succeeded," he admitted. "You're doing it now," Adelaide countered. "Protecting us, standing against Blackwell, being the man I remembered." The simple faith in her voice was humbling and terrifying. Jackson wasn't sure he deserved such trust, or if he could live up to it when the moment of truth arrived. "Get some rest," he said, deflecting the weight of her expectations. "I'll wake you for your watch." Adelaide seemed about to say more, but instead she simply nodded. "Good night, Jackson, and thank you for everything." As she ascended the stairs, Jackson returned his attention to the storm-dark night beyond the window. Somewhere out there, Blackwell's men might be approaching, using the weather as cover for their advance. Or perhaps they were waiting for morning for their employer's arrival before making their move. Either way, the coming day would bring a reckoning, for Adelaide and her makeshift family, for Blackwell and his evil enterprise, and for Jackson himself, a test of whether the man he'd once been still existed beneath the layers of grief and solitude he'd wrapped around himself like armor. The night stretched long before him, filled with rain and wind and the weight of approaching conflict. Jackson settled into the rocking chair near the window, his revolver close at hand, and prepared to wait. The storm broke shortly before dawn, leaving behind a world washed clean and gleaming in the early light. Jackson stood on the porch watching as the sun crested the eastern hills, painting the wet grass and dripping pines with golden fire. It was the kind of morning that usually brought him a measure of peace, a reminder of nature's indifferent beauty, regardless of human concerns. Today it only heightened his awareness of what they stood to lose. Adelaide joined him, two steaming mugs of coffee in her hands. She offered one silently, and he accepted with a nod of thanks. "No sign of trouble in the night?" she asked, her voice still rough with sleep. "None. The storm may have delayed them. Or they're waiting for Blackwell to arrive on the morning stage." Adelaide sipped her coffee, her green eyes scanning the horizon. "What time does it usually reach Pine Ridge?" "Around 10 if the roads aren't too muddy from the storm." She nodded, calculating. "So we have perhaps 3 hours before they might come." "4 at most." "Assuming they come today at all," Jackson pointed out. "They might wait, observe, plan their approach more carefully. Blackwell isn't known for patience, not when he's this close to his quarry." Adelaide's voice was matter-of-fact, but Jackson noted the slight tremor in her hands as she raised her mug again. "He'll come today. I'm certain of it. Inside the house, they could hear Lily's high, clear voice asking Isaiah questions about breakfast. The domestic sounds were incongruous against the backdrop of their grim conversation. "We should get everyone ready," Jackson said. "Make sure Isaiah and Lily know what to do if trouble starts." Adelaide nodded, but before she could respond, the sound of hoofbeats in the distance caught their attention. A lone rider was approaching from the direction of Pine Ridge, pushing his horse hard across the muddy ground. Jackson's hand went to his revolver, but as the rider drew closer, he recognized Harvey Parker's lanky frame and distinctive gray hat. "It's Parker," he told Adelaide, who had tensed beside him. "The deputy from Pine Ridge." Relief flickered across her features, quickly replaced by concern. "If he's riding out here this early, something must be wrong." They waited on the porch as Parker guided his lathered horse into the yard and dismounted with his characteristic slight limp. The deputy's face was grim, his clothes spattered with mud from the hard ride. "Jackson," he called, tethering his horse to the porch rail. "Got news you need to hear." "Come inside," Jackson invited, noting how Parker's gaze lingered on Adelaide with undisguised curiosity. "Adelaide, this is Deputy Harvey Parker, Harvey Adelaide Winters." Parker removed his hat, nodding respectfully to Adelaide. "Ma'am, heard a lot about you lately." "I imagine you have," she replied with a wry smile. "None of it particularly flattering, I'm sure. Depends on who's doing the talking." Parker followed them into the house where Isaiah stood protectively in the kitchen doorway, Lily partially hidden behind him. "Morning," the deputy greeted them, his tone softening at the sight of the children. "This is Isaiah and Lily," Adelaide introduced. "They're under my care. Isaiah, Lily, this is Deputy Parker. He's a friend of Jackson's." Isaiah remained wary, but Lily peeked around him with frank curiosity. "Are you a real deputy?" she asked, "with a star and everything." Parker smiled, touching the badge pinned to his vest. "Yes, miss, a real deputy with a real star." This seemed to satisfy Lily, who retreated to the kitchen, dragging Isaiah with her. Once they were alone, Parker's expression grew serious again. "Blackwell arrived on the early stage," he said without preamble. "Must have pushed the driver to make up time despite the storm. Brought 4 men with him, professional, looking all armed." Jackson exchanged a look with Adelaide. "Any idea what they're planning?" "They've taken rooms at Finch's boarding house. Blackwell's been asking questions, showing Adelaide's photograph around town, making no secret of the fact that he's looking for her." Parker removed his hat, running a hand through his thinning hair. "But that's not the worst of it. He's got papers, arrest warrants for Adelaide on charges of kidnapping, theft, and assault. And he's got Judge Monroe's signature on them." Adelaide paled. "Monroe, but he's a federal judge, respected. How could Blackwell—" "Money talks," Parker said grimly, "and Blackwell's got plenty of it. He's offered a $500 reward for information leading to your capture." $500, Jackson murmured. "In a town as economically depressed as Pine Ridge, that kind of money would turn many a moral compass." "It gets worse," Parker continued. "Blackwell's claiming legal guardianship of Lily, says her parents appointed him trustee of her affairs before they died. He's got papers for that too, all official looking." Adelaide's hands clenched into fists. "That's a lie. Lily's parents never met Blackwell. They'd never have entrusted their daughter to him." "Forgeries, most likely," Jackson surmised, "but convincing ones with the right official seals and signatures." "Exactly." Parker sighed heavily. "Look, I know these charges are false, but Blackwell's playing this by the book legally. I'm supposed to help him serve these warrants. Sheriff Tanner would expect it." "And will you?" Adelaide asked quietly. Parker met her gaze steadily. "No, ma'am. Some things matter more than following orders. But I need you to understand Blackwell's creating a situation where he can claim to be acting legally. If you resist arrest, if Jackson here interferes, you'll be branded outlaws. And Blackwell will be justified in using whatever force he deems necessary." "So we're trapped," Adelaide said bitterly. "If we surrender, Lily goes to Blackwell, Isaiah likely ends up in chains, and I'll face a rigged trial. If we resist, we're criminals who can be shot on sight." "Those are the options Blackwell wants you to see," Parker agreed, "but there might be another way." Jackson leaned forward, suddenly intent. "What are you thinking, Harvey?" "Judge Monroe is in Millbrook this week hearing cases at the county courthouse. If we could get Adelaide and the evidence from her journal to him directly, bypass Blackwell entirely." Parker shrugged. "It's a long shot. Monroe might already be in Blackwell's pocket. But it's a chance, hope flickered in Adelaide's eyes. How far is Millbrook? 15 miles, Jackson answered. A hard day's ride in good conditions. Which these aren't, Parker added, gesturing toward the window. Roads are a mess after the storm. And Blackwell's men will be watching all the approaches to Lone Star by now. They fell silent, each considering the limited options before them. Finally, Jackson spoke. I could create a diversion, he suggested. Draw Blackwell's attention while Adelaide takes the children to Millbrook. Absolutely not, Adelaide protested immediately. I won't leave you to face them alone. It makes tactical sense, Jackson insisted. I know this land better than anyone. I can lead them on a chase, buy you time to reach Judge Monroe. And if they catch you, Adelaide's voice rose slightly. What then? Jackson had no answer for that. The likely outcome was clear to all of them, capture at best, death at worst. There's another option, Parker said slowly. One Blackwell might not expect. Instead of running what, if Adelaide went to Pine Ridge voluntarily, confronted Blackwell publicly in front of witnesses, Adelaide stared at him as if he'd lost his mind. Walk into the lion's den. How would that help? Because Blackwell's power comes from shadows, Parker explained, from operating behind closed doors, using his position to silence anyone who might expose him. But in public, with the whole town watching, he'd have to maintain the facade of legal propriety. It's too dangerous, Jackson objected. He could simply have her arrested on the spot. Yes, but arresting someone isn't the same as making them disappear. There would be records, procedures to follow. And if Adelaide were to loudly proclaim her innocence, demand a proper trial with witnesses, Parker shrugged. It might create enough confusion, enough public scrutiny to make Blackwell hesitate. Adelaide considered this, her brow furrowed in thought. And while attention is focused on me, what of Lily and Isaiah? They stay hidden, Jackson said, catching Parker's line of thinking. Either here or somewhere else. If Blackwell's focus is on capturing you, he might relax the search for them temporarily. Giving us time to get them to Judge Monroe in Millbrook, Parker finished, with the journal and other evidence. It was a desperate plan full of risks and uncertainties. But as they discussed the details, refining and adjusting, Jackson began to see its potential. Blackwell was expecting them to run or to barricade themselves at Lone Star. He wouldn't anticipate Adelaide walking directly into Pine Ridge, deliberately placing herself in his path. The element of surprise might be their only advantage. I don't like it, Isaiah announced from the kitchen doorway where he'd apparently been listening. Miss Adelaide would be putting herself in danger while we run away. It's not right. Adelaide rose, crossing to him and taking his hands in hers. Isaiah, protecting Lily is the most important thing. You know that. If this plan gives us the best chance of keeping her safe, of exposing Blackwell's crimes, then it's worth the risk. But what about you? Lily's small voice piped up from behind Isaiah. What if the bad man hurts you? Adelaide tensed up, bringing herself to the little girl's eye level. Sometimes sweetheart grown-ups have to do scary things to protect the people they love. But I promise you that I'll do everything I can to come back to you. Lily's lower lip trembled, but she nodded bravely. Like in the stories, where the hero has to face the dragon to save the kingdom. Just like that, Adelaide agreed, gathering the child into a tight embrace. Jackson watched the exchange, a complex emotion tightening his chest. Adelaide's willingness to sacrifice herself for these children, her quiet courage in the face of overwhelming odds, moved something deep within him, a recognition of the kind of selfless love he'd once known with Hannah and James. If we're doing this, he said, when Adelaide rejoined them at the table, we need to move quickly. Blackwell won't wait long before coming here. Parker nodded. I should get back to town. If I'm gone too long, it might raise suspicions. He turned to Adelaide. If you're coming to Pine Ridge, do it around noon. Most folks will be at the Mercantile or the cafe. More witnesses that way. And where will you be? Jackson asked. Watching, ready to intervene if things go badly. Parker rose, settling his hat back on his head. I've spoken with a few men I trust. They'll be ready too, though God knows what good a handful of farmers and shopkeepers will be against Blackwell's hired guns. It wasn't much reassurance, but it was something. Jackson walked Parker to the door, stepping onto the porch with him for a private word. If this goes wrong, he said quietly, if Adelaide is arrested, get the children to Judge Monroe, whatever it takes. Parker studied him, understanding the unspoken implications. You won't be able to help them if you're dead, Jackson. I'm aware, but some things are worth dying for. Jackson glanced back toward the house where Adelaide was visible through the window, comforting Lily. She's risking everything to protect those children. I can do no less. The deputy sighed, recognizing the futility of argument. I'll do what I can, he promised, for all of you. As Parker rode away, Jackson remained on the porch watching until the deputy disappeared over the rise that separated Lone Star from the road to Pine Ridge. The morning was advancing, the sun climbing higher in a sky washed clean by the night's storm. Birds sang in the pines, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of wet earth and growing things. It was a beautiful day for a confrontation with evil. Adelaide joined him, her expression resolute. It's time to prepare, she said simply. Together, they returned to the house to make ready for the battle to come. The church bell in Pine Ridge struck noon, its sonorous tones rolling across the valley like distant thunder. Jackson stood at the edge of town watching as Adelaide adjusted her borrowed shawl one final time. She had insisted on coming alone, riding the gentlest mare from Jackson's small herd, while he remained behind with the children. But Jackson Hargrove had never been good at following orders, even ones given with Adelaide's quiet authority. You shouldn't be here, she said, not for the first time. If Blackwell sees you, he'll be too focused on you to notice me, Jackson assured her. I'll keep my distance, but I won't let you face him alone. Adelaide's eyes softened, though her jaw remained set with determination. Stubborn man. I've been called worse. Jackson reached out, adjusting the collar of her dress, a simple gesture that allowed him to touch her, perhaps for the last time. Remember the plan. Keep Blackwell talking as long as possible. The more public attention, the better. I know. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. And you'll make sure Isaiah and Lily reach Millbrook safely. Parker has already left with them. By the time Blackwell realizes they're gone, they'll be halfway to Judge Monroe. They had decided this alteration to the plan just an hour earlier. Parker would escort the children directly to Millbrook, carrying Adelaide's journal and other evidence, while Jackson remained to support Adelaide in Pine Ridge. It was risky separating their already limited forces, but it ensured that even if Adelaide and Jackson were captured or killed, the children and the evidence might still reach safety. It's time, Adelaide said softly, gazing toward the main street where people were emerging from buildings for their midday activities. Wish me luck. Jackson wanted to say more to express the tumult of emotions that had been building in him since Adelaide's arrival at Lone Star. But words had never been his strength, especially not words of the heart. Instead, he simply nodded. I'll be watching. Always. Adelaide's lips curved in a brief, sad smile. Then she straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and rode toward Pine Ridge's main street with the dignity of a queen approaching her throne. Jackson waited until she was well ahead before following, keeping to the shadows between buildings. The town was busier than usual for a weekday, perhaps due to the presence of Judge Blackwell and his men. Curiosity had drawn people from outlying farms and homesteads, all eager to glimpse the distinguished visitor from Denver, and perhaps learn why he was interested in their tiny forgotten community. Adelaide rode directly to the center of town, reining in her mare before the small gazebo that served as Pine Ridge's gathering place for announcements and celebrations. Already heads were turning, whispers spreading as people recognized the woman who had caused such a stir earlier in the week. From his vantage point near Myers Pharmacy, Jackson spotted Blackwell almost immediately. The judge stood on the boarding house porch surrounded by four men whose stiff postures and alert eyes marked them as hired muscle rather than legal assistants. Blackwell himself was a striking figure, tall and lean, with silver hair and beard meticulously groomed and piercing blue eyes that missed nothing. He wore an expensive black suit despite the informal setting and leaned slightly on a silver-headed cane. When he saw Adelaide, a smile spread across his aristocratic features, the smile of a predator, sighting prey that had wandered willingly into its jaws. Adelaide dismounted gracefully despite her still healing wound and climbed the gazebo steps. From this elevated position, she was visible to everyone in the vicinity. Conversations quieted as townspeople turned to watch, curious about this newcomer who commanded such attention. People of Pine Ridge, Adelaide called, her voice clear and carrying. My name is Adelaide Winters. Some of you may remember me from years ago when my father worked the mines north of town. Others may know me only through recent rumors and speculation. The crowd grew as she spoke, drawn by the unusual spectacle of a woman making a public address. Jackson noted with satisfaction that at least 30 people had gathered witnesses to whatever happened next. "I've come to address those rumors directly," Adelaide continued, "and to expose a grave injustice that threatens not just myself, but all who value truth and human dignity." At this, Blackwell began moving through the crowd, his men flanking him like an honor guard. His smile remained fixed, but Jackson could see the calculation in his eyes, the assessment of how best to silence Adelaide without creating a scene. "The man approaching now is Judge Theodore Blackwell of Denver." Adelaide said, her gaze fixed on the silver-haired figure drawing nearer. "He is respected, wealthy, and powerful. He is also a kidnapper, a slaver, and a murderer." A shocked murmur ran through the crowd. Such accusations against a judge were unprecedented, especially from a lone woman with no apparent standing or authority. Blackwell reached the gazebo, looking up at Adelaide with an expression of paternal concern. "Miss Winters," he said, his voice rich and resonant, carrying the practiced cadence of a courtroom orator, "I'm relieved to see you safe, though deeply troubled by your confused state." "I'm not confused, Judge Blackwell," Adelaide replied, her voice steady. "Nor am I insane, as I'm sure you're about to suggest. I am, however, in possession of evidence that will destroy you and the Heritage Restoration Society you lead." For the briefest moment, Blackwell's mask of benevolent concern slipped, revealing something cold and reptilian beneath. Then it was back in place, his smile sorrowful, as he addressed the gathered crowd. "Friends, I apologize for this unfortunate display. Miss Winters is unwell, a tragedy that has affected her reason. She worked at my hospital for unwed mothers until recently, when she suffered a breakdown and fled with a child under our care." He turned back to Adelaide, his voice dropping to a register of practiced compassion. "Adelaide, please, come down. Let me help you as I've helped so many others. There's no shame in mental illness. With proper treatment like you provided Martha Williams," Adelaide interrupted, her voice sharp as a blade. "Isaiah's mother, who died in your hospital after you took her newborn daughter. Or like the treatment you planned for Lily, whose parents never appointed you her guardian despite the forged papers you're carrying." Blackwell's expression hardened momentarily before he regained his composure. "These are the delusions I mentioned. Miss Winters has constructed an elaborate fantasy to justify her actions." He reached into his coat, withdrawing a folded document. "I have here a warrant for her arrest signed by Federal Judge Monroe on charges of kidnapping, assault, and theft." Jackson tensed, hand moving to his concealed revolver. This was the dangerous moment when Blackwell might attempt to take Adelaide by force regardless of witnesses. But Adelaide wasn't finished. "Interesting that you obtained Judge Monroe's signature so quickly," she called loud enough for all to hear. "Especially since Judge Monroe is in Millbrook this week hearing cases at the county courthouse, a fact anyone in the region could confirm." Another murmur swept through the crowd, this one tinged with uncertainty. Adelaide was directly challenging the authenticity of Blackwell's legal documents, and doing so in a way that could be easily verified. Blackwell's smile tightened. "The warrant was signed last week before Judge Monroe left Denver. Now, I've been patient, Miss Winters, but my patience has limits. Come down from there and surrender yourself, or my men will be forced to remove you." The four men with Blackwell moved forward slightly, hands drifting toward concealed weapons. Jackson eased away from the pharmacy wall, positioning himself for a clearer line of sight. If shooting started, Adelaide would be terribly exposed on the gazebo. "Before your men take action," Adelaide said calmly, "they should know that I've already sent copies of my evidence to newspapers in Denver, Colorado Springs, and San Francisco. If anything happens to me, that evidence will be published. The operations of your hospital, the transactions of the Heritage Restoration Society, the disappearances of women and children, all of it will become public knowledge." It was a bluff, a desperate one. No such copies had been sent. But Blackwell couldn't know that for certain, and Jackson saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes. Additionally, Adelaide continued gaining confidence from Blackwell's hesitation. "Deputy Parker has already left for Millbrook with the original evidence, as well as 2 witnesses who can testify to your crimes. By this time tomorrow, Judge Monroe will have everything he needs to issue real warrants for your arrest, Judge Blackwell." This revelation, partly true, caused a visible reaction in Blackwell. His careful mask slipped again, longer this time, revealing naked fury beneath the veneer of civilization. Enough of this farce, he snapped, gesturing to his men. Arrest her now! The hired guns moved toward the gazebo, hands now openly on their weapons. The crowd drew back, unwilling to be caught in potential crossfire, but equally unwilling to abandon the spectacle unfolding before them. Jackson stepped forward, emerging from the shadows into plain view. I wouldn't, he called, his voice carrying the authority of his military days. The lady is under my protection. Blackwell turned his cold eyes, fixing on Jackson with predatory focus. And who might you be, sir, to interfere in a legal arrest? Jackson Hargrove, owner of Lone Star Ranch. Jackson moved closer, keeping his hands visible but ready, and former Captain Medical Corps Army of the Potomac. At this, a strange expression crossed Blackwell's face, recognition followed by something like perverse delight. Captain Hargrove, he said, pronouncing the name with careful precision, of the field hospital at Devil's Canyon. How providential. Jackson felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. You know me. Oh, indeed. Blackwell's smile became almost genuine in its malice. We've never met, but I know you intimately, Captain. You made a choice, you see, that day at Devil's Canyon. A choice that altered the course of many lives. Confusion and unease settled in Jackson's gut. Devil's Canyon, the battlefield that haunted his dreams. The impossible choice between two wounded men, one Confederate, one Union. The nightmare that had pursued him for 15 years. The boy, Blackwell said softly, watching Jackson's face with cruel satisfaction. The Confederate lieutenant you let die while you saved the Union captain. That boy was my son, Thomas. The revelation hit Jackson like a physical blow. Thomas Blackwell, the fair-haired youth with pleading blue eyes. The boy whose life Jackson had weighed against another's and found wanting, not from malice but from the brutal arithmetic of triage. A lesser wound, a younger man, but an enemy soldier against an officer who might save others if he lived. He was 17, Blackwell continued, his voice hardening, barely more than a child, and you left him to die. I had supplies for one, Jackson said, the old justification rising automatically to his lips. The captain had intelligence that could save dozens of our men. I had to choose. Yes, you did choose. Blackwell's face contorted with a hatred that had clearly festered for years. And now I find you here protecting another thief who has taken what's mine. It seems fate has a sense of humor after all. The personal connection explained much. Blackwell's presence in Pine Ridge, his determination to handle Adelaide's capture personally rather than sending subordinates. This wasn't just about silencing a witness or recovering valuable property in Lily. It was about vengeance against the man Blackwell blamed for his son's death. What happened at Devil's Canyon was war, Jackson said, keeping his voice steady despite the shock of recognition. What you're doing now, trafficking in human beings, hunting children, that's something else entirely. Justice, Blackwell spat. I'm restoring the natural order that men like you destroyed. When my son died, I swore to rebuild the world he should have inherited. A world of proper hierarchies of natural servitude for those born to serve. The crowd had grown silent, watching the confrontation with a mixture of confusion and uneasy fascination. Few in Pine Ridge would fully understand the references to the Heritage Restoration Society or Blackwell's thinly veiled advocacy for slavery's return, but they recognized the dangerous tension building between the two men. Adelaide had remained on the gazebo watching the exchange with growing alarm. Now she descended the steps, moving to Jackson's side despite the risk. This is between you and me, Judge Blackwell, she said firmly. Mr. Hargrove is merely offering shelter to a family friend. Any quarrel you have with him is separate from my accusations. On the contrary, Miss Winters. Blackwell's smile was terrible in its satisfaction. It seems you and the good doctor are quite intimately connected in this affair. How fortunate that I can resolve both matters at once. He turned to his men, his voice hardening to command. Make them both. Kill the man if he resists. The woman is to be kept alive for now. The 4 hired guns moved forward, spreading out to flank Jackson and Adelaide. The crowd scattered, some running for the safety of nearby buildings, others watching from what they hoped was a safe distance. No one intervened. No one stood with them. Jackson reached for his revolver, knowing it was futile against 4 experienced gunmen, but unwilling to surrender without a fight. Adelaide pressed close to his side, her hand finding his in a gesture of solidarity that seemed to say, "Together then." to the end. The crack of a rifle shot froze everyone in place. Samuel Meyer stood in the doorway of his pharmacy, a Winchester repeater balanced in his gnarled hands. Despite his age, he held it with the steady confidence of a man who'd grown up on the frontier. "That was a warning," the old pharmacist called. "The next one goes through someone's head if this nonsense doesn't stop right now." A murmur ran through the remaining onlookers. Meyer was respected in Pine Ridge, the closest thing to a doctor. The town had a founder who'd been there since the first tents were pitched. "This isn't your concern, old man." One of Blackwell's men growled, his hand still on his holstered revolver. "Anything that happens in Pine Ridge is my concern," Meyer retorted. "I've delivered most of the babies in this town, patched up most of the men, buried more than a few, and I don't recall voting for vigilante justice in our last town meeting." Another voice joined Meyer's. "He's right." Eleanor Finch emerged from her boarding house, a shotgun cradled in her arms like an infant. "If these people have broken laws, they deserve a proper trial. Not whatever this is." Blackwell's expression darkened with barely controlled rage. "Mrs. Finch, this woman has kidnapped a child under my legal guardianship. This man is harboring her and interfering with her lawful arrest. I have the authority." "You have authority in Denver, perhaps," came another voice. Reverend Lawrence stood on the church steps, his Bible in one hand. "But here in Pine Ridge, we still believe in due process. If you have legitimate warrants, they should be served by our own Deputy Parker, not private gunmen." "Parker isn't here," Blackwell snapped. "He's fled with the very criminals I'm trying to apprehend." "Then perhaps we should wait for his return," Meyer suggested, his rifle unwavering. "Or for Sheriff Tanner to arrive from Denver. Either way, there'll be no shooting in our streets today." More townspeople were emerging now, some armed, all watching with wary determination. Not everyone in Pine Ridge might care about Adelaide's accusations or Jackson's past, but they all understood the sanctity of their community against outside interference. Blackwell surveyed the scene, his cold calculation visible in his eyes. He was outnumbered now, not just by Jackson and Adelaide, but by a town that had unexpectedly roused itself to action. "This delay changes nothing," he said finally, his voice tight with controlled fury. "The woman is still a criminal. The child, it is still my legal ward. And you, Captain Hargrove, are still the man who let my son die." He turned to his men. "We withdraw. For now." As Blackwell and his men retreated toward the boarding house, the tension in the air gradually dissipated. People began talking in low, excited voices, processing the dramatic confrontation they just witnessed. Meyer approached Jackson and Adelaide, his rifle now lowered, but still ready. "That was quite a show," the old pharmacist commented dryly, "though I suspect the final act is yet to come." "Thank you, Samuel," Jackson said, his voice rough with emotion. "I didn't expect, that is, I thought we stood alone." 15 years you've lived among us, Jackson Hargrove, delivering medicines in blizzards, helping birth calves in the middle of the night, never asking for thanks or recognition." Meyer's roomy eyes were surprisingly keen. "Did you really think no one noticed? No one cared?" Before Jackson could respond, Eleanor Finch joined them, her shotgun now resting in the crook of her arm, her stern gaze fixed on Adelaide. "Young woman," she said severely, "when you first arrived, I refused you lodging because you seemed like trouble. It appears I was correct in that assessment." A brief, unexpected smile softened her features. "However, I may have been hasty in my judgment of your character. Any enemy of that cold-eyed bastard is welcome in my establishment." Adelaide blinked, clearly surprised by the turnabout. "Thank you, Mrs. Finch. That's very kind. Don't mistake me for kind child. I'm practical, and I know the look of a man who believes he owns people." Mrs. Finch's expression hardened again. "My first husband had that same look. Never again, I swore. Not for me, not for anyone." More townspeople were gathering now, offering support or simply curious about the strangers who had brought such excitement to their quiet community. Jackson felt overwhelmed by the unexpected show of solidarity, but Adelaide maintained her composure, thanking each person while keeping a wary eye on the boarding house where Blackwell had retreated. "We need to leave," she murmured to Jackson when there was a momentary lull in the attention. "Blackwell won't give up. He's just regrouping." Jackson nodded, though he was reluctant to abandon the surprising allies they'd found in Pine Ridge. "Myers," he suggested, "we can regroup there, plan our next move." They made their way to the pharmacy where Meyer locked the door behind them and drew the shades. The old pharmacist moved with surprising energy for his age, gathering supplies and speaking in rapid, practical bursts. Blackwell's men were asking about the road to Millbrook earlier, he informed them. I think they suspect where Parker's gone with the children. They'll send someone after them if they haven't already. Jackson's concern spiked. We need to warn them, or better yet, catch up to them before Blackwell's men do. That's exactly what Blackwell expects, Meyer cautioned. He's hoping you'll rush off half-cocked, making yourself an easier target away from town. So what do you suggest? Adelaide asked, her voice tight with worry for the children. We can't just wait here while Lily and Isaiah are in danger. Meyer considered this, stroking his wispy beard. There's another route to Millbrook, he said finally. Not the main road, an old trapper's trail through the high country. Hardly anyone uses it these days, too steep, too narrow for wagons. But on horseback you could make good time. I know it, Jackson confirmed. Used it sometimes during spring floods when the main road was washed out. But Blackwell's men will be watching all routes out of town. Not if they're distracted, Meyer said with a sly smile that took years off his weathered face. I think it's time Pine Ridge remembered how to throw a proper welcoming celebration for our distinguished visitor from Denver. An hour later, Jackson and Adelaide slipped out the back of Meyer's pharmacy while what appeared to be an impromptu town gathering was forming in the street before the boarding house. Meyer had spread word that Pine Ridge wished to properly honor Judge Blackwell with a reception complete with speeches from town elders and refreshments provided by the Ladies' Aid Society. It was a transparent ruse, but one that social convention would make difficult for Blackwell to refuse without appearing ungracious. More importantly, it would keep him and his men occupied while Jackson and Adelaide made their escape. They rode hard, following the narrow trail that wound through pine forests and across rocky slopes above the main valley. The path was treacherous in places, forcing them to slow to a walk, but it offered excellent visibility of the countryside below. From one high vantage point, they spotted two riders on the main road to Millbrook, men moving with the purposeful haste of hunters on a trail. Blackwell hadn't been completely fooled by the town's distraction. They'll catch up to Parker and the children before they reach Millbrook, Adelaide said, her voice tight with fear. Jackson studied the terrain through his field glasses. Not necessarily. Parker knows these trails too. He may have left the main road as a precaution. And if he didn't? Jackson had no reassuring answer. The harsh truth was that Parker, traveling with two children, would be moving slower than the men pursuing them. If they remained on the main road, they would be overtaken well before reaching the safety of Millbrook and Judge Monroe. We push harder, he said finally. There's a place ahead where this trail rejoins the main road. If we can reach it first, we might intercept Parker before Blackwell's men do. They rode in tense silence, both acutely aware of the stakes. If Blackwell's men captured Lily, she would disappear into the Heritage Restoration Society's network, likely never to be seen again. Isaiah might face an even worse fate, a colored boy who had witnessed too much, who could identify Blackwell and his associates. The afternoon sun was dipping toward the western peaks when they reached the junction where the trapper's trail descended to meet the main road. Jackson reined in, surveying the terrain. No sign of Parker and the children, nor of Blackwell's men. We're ahead of them, he said, relief evident in his voice, but they can't be far behind. As if summoned by his words, the distant sound of hoofbeats reached them, multiple horses approaching from the direction of Pine Ridge. Jackson dismounted quickly, leading Adelaide and their horses into the cover of pines beside the road. Stay here, he instructed, drawing his revolver. If it's Parker, I'll signal. If it's Blackwell's men, let them pass, then we continue to Millbrook. Adelaide nodded, though it clearly pained her to remain hidden, while others determined Lily and Isaiah's fate. Jackson squeezed her hand briefly, then crept forward to a position where he could observe the road without being seen. The riders appeared around a bend, two men moving at a fast trot, scanning the terrain with the practiced eyes of hunters. Jackson recognized one as the ex-Pinkerton Mercer, whom Parker had identified in Pine Ridge. The other was younger, with the hard look of a man who had seen combat and emerged without his humanity intact. They paused at the junction, examining the ground for tracks. Jackson held his breath, hoping the recent rain and rocky soil would conceal any sign of Parker's passage. After a tense moment, the younger man pointed toward Millbrook, and they continued on their way, pace quickening. Once they were safely out of sight, Jackson returned to Adelaide. Blackwell's men, he confirmed, heading for Millbrook. No sign they spotted Parker's trail. Then where is Parker? Adelaide asked, scanning the road anxiously. He should have been here by now. Jackson shared her concern. Had Parker taken another route, been delayed, or worse, intercepted by other pursuers they weren't aware of? We can't wait, he decided. Those men will reach Millbrook within 2 hours. We need to get there first, warn Judge Monroe, secure his protection before Blackwell can intervene. Adelaide nodded reluctantly, clearly torn between pressing on to Millbrook and searching for the missing children. But Jackson was right. Without Judge Monroe's authority, they had no real defense against Blackwell's warrants and legal maneuvers. They remounted and continued toward Millbrook, pushing their tired horses as much as they dared on the rough terrain. The sun sank, lower shadows lengthening across the valley, turning the autumn landscape into a study in gold and deep blue. They were perhaps 5 miles from Millbrook when they heard it, a child's cry quickly muffled from a stand of aspens off the main road. Jackson and Adelaide exchanged a glance, then immediately veered toward the sound. In a small clearing sheltered by golden aspens, they found Parker's horse tethered to a tree. The deputy himself was nowhere to be seen, but clear tracks led deeper into the grove. "Parker," Jackson called softly, dismounting and drawing his revolver again. "It's Hargrove." Silence greeted him, then a rustle from behind a fallen log. Isaiah's face appeared tense with suspicion until he recognized them. "Miss Adelaide, Dr. Hargrove." The boy emerged, fully relief washing over his features. "Thank God. We thought you might be more of Blackwell's men." "Where's Parker and Lily?" Adelaide asked urgently, dismounting and rushing to Isaiah's side. "This way." Isaiah led them deeper into the aspen grove to a small hollow where Parker sat with his back against a tree, Lily curled beside him. The deputy's left leg was stretched awkwardly before him, a blood-stained bandage wrapped around his thigh. "Took a tumble when the horse shied at a rattlesnake," Parker explained through gritted teeth. "Landed wrong, reopened an old war wound. Couldn't ride further." Lily launched herself at Adelaide, wrapping thin arms around her waist with desperate strength. "You came back," she whispered. "I knew you would." "Always," Adelaide promised, stroking the child's curly hair. "Are you all right? Did anyone hurt you?" "We're fine," Isaiah answered. "But 2 men passed by about an hour ago, heading for Millbrook. Deputy Parker made us hide until they were gone." Jackson knelt beside Parker, examining the wounded leg with professional detachment. "Clean break," he assessed. "But you've lost blood and there's a risk of infection. You need proper medical attention." "What I need," Parker grimaced, "is for you to take the children and the evidence to Judge Monroe. Blackwell's men are already ahead of you. There's no time to waste on me." "We're not leaving you," Adelaide said firmly. "You must," Parker insisted. "This isn't just about us anymore. If Blackwell reaches Monroe first, spins his version of events before you can present the evidence." He didn't need to finish the thought. They all understood the stakes. Blackwell's influence, his carefully cultivated reputation, might well trump the accusations of strangers, especially if those accusations came after he had already established his narrative with the federal judge. "We'll send help back from Millbrook." Jackson decided, though the idea of leaving a wounded man a friend went against every instinct. "You have water food?" Parker nodded. "Enough for the night." But the journal, he reached into his coat, withdrawing Adelaide's leather-bound record of Blackwell's crimes. "Take it. It's the only solid evidence we have." Adelaide accepted the journal, tucking it securely inside her bodice. "Isaiah," she said, turning to the boy, "I need you to stay with Deputy Parker. Keep him safe. Keep Lily safe. Can you do that?" Isaiah straightened, his young face solemn with responsibility. "Yes, ma'am. I won't let anything happen to them." "No," Lily protested, clinging tighter to Adelaide. "Don't leave again. Please." Adelaide knelt gently, disengaging the child's grip. "Lily, sweetheart, listen to me. This is important. Dr. Hargrove and I need to go to Millbrook to talk to a judge who can help us. A good judge, not like Blackwell. But we need you to be brave a little longer. Can you do that for me?" Lily's lower lip trembled, but she nodded with the solemn dignity only a child can muster in moments of crisis. "Like in the stories," she said, "the hero has to finish the quest before coming home." "Exactly like that." Adelaide smiled, though her eyes glistened with unshed tears. She embraced Lily once more, then rose, her expression resolute. "We'll be back by morning. With help." Jackson handed Parker his spare revolver and most of their remaining food and water. The deputy accepted both with grim thanks. If Blackwell's men come back this way, Parker warned, don't try to be a hero, hide. Keep the children safe. That's your only job. Understood. Parker shifted, wincing as the movement jarred his injured leg. Now go. Darkness will work to your advantage. Blackwell's men won't expect you to risk the mountain roads at night. With a final farewell, Jackson and Adelaide remounted their tired horses and set off toward Millbrook. The sun had set completely now, leaving only a fading glow along the western horizon. Soon they were riding by starlight and the occasional gleam of moonlight through breaking clouds. The road to Millbrook wound through dark pines and across open meadows silvered by starlight. They rode in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, aware that everything, Lily's future, Isaiah's safety, the exposure of Blackwell's crimes now depended on reaching Judge Monroe before Blackwell's men could poison the well. Do you think he'll believe us? Adelaide asked finally, her voice small against the vast night. Monroe, I mean. We're strangers to him while Blackwell is a respected colleague. Monroe has a reputation for integrity, Jackson replied, hoping he sounded more confident than he felt. And your journal provides concrete evidence, names, dates, financial records. It will be difficult to dismiss. But not impossible. Adelaide's tone was bleak. Men like Blackwell have been escaping justice for years by relying on their position, their connections. Why should this time be different? Jackson had no easy answer. She was right, the odds were against them, had been from the start. Blackwell's power, his wealth, his careful cultivation of respectability made him a formidable opponent. And now he had the added motivation of personal vengeance against Jackson for his son's death at Devil's Canyon. Because this time, he said finally, he made a mistake. He let you escape with evidence. He underestimated your courage, your determination to protect those children. Jackson glanced at her profile silvered by starlight. He never imagined someone like you would stand against someone like him. Adelaide turned toward him, her expression softening. Someone like me? Brave, Jackson said simply, principled, unwilling to look away from evil even when it would be easier, safer. A small smile touched her lips. You make me sound like a hero from one of Lily's stories. Perhaps you are. The words emerged before Jackson could reconsider them, honest in a way he rarely allowed himself to be. They crested a rise, and below them, the lights of Millbrook glowed in the valley, a constellation of human habitation against the vast darkness. Larger than Pine Ridge, with proper streets and substantial buildings, Millbrook had prospered when the railroad chose it over its neighboring town. We're close, Jackson said, urging his weary horse forward. Another half hour and we'll reach the courthouse. But as they descended toward the town, movement on the road ahead made them rein in sharply. A group of riders was approaching from Millbrook, moving with purpose despite the darkness. Jackson gestured Adelaide to follow him into the cover of trees beside the road. Blackwell's men, she whispered as they watched the approaching riders. Can't tell, Jackson murmured back. Too many for just the two we saw earlier. The riders drew closer, 6 men, their features indistinct in the darkness. But as they passed the hiding place, moonlight caught the silver star on one man's vest. Sheriff Tanner, Jackson breathed, recognizing the burly figure leading the group. From Pine Ridge, he must have returned from Denver. Before Adelaide could respond, Jackson urged his horse back onto the road, calling out to the passing riders. Sheriff Tanner, it's Jackson Hargrove. The group wheeled hands, moving to weapons, then relaxing slightly as they recognized Jackson in the dim light. Hargrove, Tanner's gruff voice carried through the night. What in blazes are you doing out here at this hour? Looking for you or Judge Monroe, Jackson answered, signaling Adelaide to join him. We have evidence of serious crimes being committed by Judge Theodore Blackwell of Denver. One of the riders pushed forward, a distinguished man in his 50s with a neatly trimmed beard and the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. I am Judge Monroe, he said, his voice deep and measured, and I've just spent 2 hours listening to Judge Blackwell's accusations against you, Sheriff Hargrove, and against Miss Winters here. Jackson's heart sank. They were too late. Blackwell had reached Monroe first. Whatever he told you, Adelaide began, but Monroe held up a hand to silence her. He told me quite a tale, Miss Winters, about a delusional nurse who stole a child from his care, about a reclusive rancher harboring fugitives, about forged evidence and slanderous accusations. Monroe's stern face revealed nothing of his thoughts. He was most persuasive. It's not true, Adelaide insisted. I have proof. So Judge Blackwell mentioned, Monroe interrupted again. A journal, he said, filled with fantastical claims and falsified records. He was quite concerned about its contents regardless of their authenticity. Jackson and Adelaide exchanged a look of despair. Blackwell had poisoned the well, thoroughly painting them as delusional criminals before they could present their case. However, Monroe continued, his tone shifting slightly. I found myself wondering why a respected judge would ride all the way from Denver to personally pursue a simple case of kidnapping, and why he would be so concerned about a journal if its contents were merely the ravings of a disturbed woman. Hope flickered faintly. You didn't believe him, Jackson said, not quite a question. Let's say I found his concern disproportionate. Monroe's eyes sharp despite the darkness moved between Jackson and Adelaide, particularly when he suggested that the most expedient solution would be to issue warrants for your immediate arrest, with the understanding that you might resist in a manner requiring lethal force. Adelaide drew a sharp breath. He meant to have us killed before we could speak to you. So it would seem, Monroe gestured to the men with him, which is why Sheriff Tanner and I have assembled this posse. Not to arrest you as Blackwell believes, but to investigate his activities and protect potential witnesses. He extended a hand toward Adelaide. The journal, if you please, Miss Winters. I believe it's time I examine this evidence for myself. Adelaide withdrew the leather-bound book from her bodice, handing it to Monroe with visible relief. The judge opened it, angling the pages to catch the moonlight, his expression growing increasingly grave as he read. Names, he murmured. Dates, financial transactions, detailed descriptions of a systematic operation too. He broke off, looking up at Adelaide with new respect. You kept meticulous records, Miss Winters. I had to, she said simply. No one would believe me otherwise. Monroe nodded, closing the journal and securing it inside his coat. They'll believe you now. This, combined with witness testimony, should be sufficient to issue warrants for Blackwell's arrest. He turned to Sheriff Tanner. I believe we should return to Millbrook immediately. There are depositions to be taken, warrants to be drawn up. What about Blackwell? Jackson asked. He's still in Pine Ridge with his men, and we have wounded back on the trail Deputy Parker and 2 children Blackwell is hunting. The children are safe for the moment, Monroe assured him. Deputy Parker sent a message to Millbrook this afternoon via a passing freighter. That's what alerted us to the situation. We were on our way to find you when Blackwell arrived spinning his version of events. Relief washed through Jackson. Parker, despite his injury, had found a way to get word to Millbrook. The deputy's resourcefulness might have saved them all. As for Blackwell, Monroe continued, his voice hardening, he'll find that his influence has certain geographical limitations. Outside Denver, beyond the reach of his carefully cultivated allies, he's just a man who will face justice for his crimes. It seemed too good to be true after everything they'd endured to find an ally in Judge Monroe, to have the weight of legal authority shifting to their side. Jackson half expected to wake and find it all a dream, but it was real. The cool night air on his face, the solid presence of Adelaide beside him, the stern justice in Monroe's eyes, all of it was wonderfully and probably real. We should retrieve Parker and the children immediately, Adelaide said, practical as always, despite their changing fortunes. They're vulnerable if Blackwell sends more men. Agreed, Monroe nodded to 2 of the deputies. Davis Johnson, ride with Miss Winters and Mr. Hargrove. Bring Deputy Parker and the children to Millbrook. The rest of us will prepare the necessary legal actions against Blackwell. As the group separated, Monroe fixed Jackson with a penetrating stare. Mr. Hargrove, when this is over, and I'd like to hear more about your history with Judge Blackwell. He seemed unusually fixated on you personally. It's a long story, Your Honor, Jackson replied wearily. From another life. I imagine so. Monroe's expression softened slightly, but perhaps one worth telling when there's time. With that, the judge and his remaining men turned toward Millbrook, while Jackson, Adelaide, and the 2 deputies headed back up the mountain road toward Parker's hiding place. As they rode, Adelaide moved her horse close to Jackson's, her voice pitched low so only he could hear. It's really happening, she marveled. Blackwell will face justice. Lily will be safe. It seems so, Jackson agreed, still hardly daring to believe it himself. And afterward, Adelaide's question hung in the night air between them. What then? It was the question Jackson had been avoiding. What came after the crisis, after the danger passed? Would Adelaide take the children and move on perhaps to Denver or further west? Would Lone Star return to its previous silence, empty but for the ghosts of what might have been? Or was there another possibility one he'd barely allowed himself to consider? I don't know, he admitted finally. I haven't thought that far ahead. Adelaide studied him in the starlight, her expression softening. Haven't you, not even once? The simple question penetrated defenses Jackson had maintained for years, walls built of grief and guilt, reinforced by solitude. In truth, he had thought about it. In quiet moments between crises, he'd imagined Adelaide in Hannah's garden, Lily's laughter echoing through rooms too long silent, Isaiah working beside him in the corrals. He'd imagined, in short, a family, a second chance at the life he'd thought forever lost when he buried Hannah and James beneath the old pine. Perhaps, he conceded, his voice rough with emotion he rarely allowed himself to express. But it seemed presumptuous. You have your own life, your own plans. I'm just an aging rancher with too many regrets and not enough future. Adelaide's laugh was soft in the darkness. Oh, Jackson, for a brilliant man, you can be remarkably obtuse. Her hand found his warm despite the cool night. Did it never occur to you that I might want exactly what you're offering, a home? Safety, the chance to raise these children somewhere they can grow and thrive. Her voice softened further. Someone to stand beside through whatever comes. The simple declaration, not quite a proposal, but something equally meaningful, left Jackson momentarily speechless. After so much loss, so much isolation, the possibility of beginning again seemed almost too fragile to acknowledge. I'm not the man I was, he warned her. The one you remember from your childhood. That man died with Hannah and James with the choices I made during the war. I know, Adelaide said gently. Just as I'm not the girl who followed you around pestering you with questions about herbs and healing. We've both been shaped by loss, by difficult choices. But perhaps that's why we understand each other now. Before Jackson could respond, they crested the rise where they'd left Parker and the children. One of the deputies lit a lantern, casting a warm glow over the aspen grove as they dismounted and made their way to the hollow. Parker was where they'd left him, his face pale but alert. Isaiah had maintained a vigilant watch, a stick sharpened into a makeshift spear clutched in his hands. Lily slept curled against Parker's side, her small face peaceful in sleep, one arm wrapped protectively around her doll. You made it. Parker breathed, relief evident in his voice. Monroe believed you. Yes, Jackson confirmed, kneeling to check the deputy's wound. Thanks in large part to your message. The freighter reached Millbrook in time. Figured it was worth a try. Parker grimaced as Jackson probed the injured leg. What about Blackwell? Still in Pine Ridge, but not for long, Adelaide explained, gathering the sleeping Lily into her arms. Judge Monroe is preparing warrants for his arrest. It's over, Harvey. We won. Parker's laugh was weak but genuine. Well, I'll be damned. Justice does triumph occasionally. The deputies helped Parker onto one of their horses while Jackson lifted Lily onto his own mount, cradling her small body protectively against his chest. Isaiah rode with Adelaide, his thin arms wrapped around her waist, his watchful expression finally relaxing into something approaching peace. As they descended toward Millbrook, the first hint of dawn lightened the eastern sky. A new day was beginning, the first of many Jackson hoped that would be free from Blackwell's shadow. Adelaide rode beside him, her profile limned in the growing light. Feeling his gaze, she turned, offering a smile that held promise and possibility. Home, she said softly, the word both question and answer. Home, Jackson agreed, the simple syllable carrying the weight of a vow. Ahead, Millbrook awaited with the machinery of justice that would ensure Blackwell's crimes were punished, Lily's future secured. Beyond that lay Lone Star Ranch, no longer a monument to what Jackson had lost, but the foundation for what he might yet build. The path forward wasn't certain. There would be legal battles, adjustments, the careful work of knitting 4 wounded souls into a family. But for the first time in 7 years, Jackson Hargrove looked to the future with something more than resignation. He looked to it with hope. 3 months later, snow-blanketed Lone Star Ranch in pristine white, transforming the familiar landscape into something magical and new. Jackson stood on the porch watching as Lily attempted to roll a snowball, nearly as large as herself, across the yard. Isaiah followed, offering advice and assistance, his serious face brightening with rare laughter when the snowball collapsed under its own weight. Inside the house, Adelaide moved about the kitchen, the scent of apple pie wafting through the open door. The rooms that had stood empty for so long now hummed with life, Lily's drawings decorating the walls, Isaiah's books stacked neatly by the fireplace, Adelaide's herbs drying in Hannah's old still room. It wasn't perfect. There were still nights when Jackson woke from nightmares of Devil's Canyon, when the ghosts of impossible choices haunted his dreams. Days when Adelaide grew quiet, remembering women she couldn't save from Blackwell's hospital. Moments when Isaiah withdrew into watchful silence or Lily woke crying for parents she barely remembered. But they were healing, all of them, in the quiet rhythms of ranch life, in the daily work of caring for animals, tending gardens, and most importantly, caring for each other. Blackwell was gone, not dead though, perhaps that would have been cleaner. Instead, he was imprisoned in Denver, awaiting trial for kidnapping, fraud, and human trafficking. The Heritage Restoration Society had collapsed upon exposure, its prominent members scurrying to distance themselves from its disgraced founder. Judge Monroe had been true to his word, ensuring that justice was served. More importantly, he had granted Adelaide legal guardianship of both Lily and Isaiah, recognizing the bonds of love that had formed during their flight from Blackwell. "Papa Jackson," Lily called, breaking into his reflections. "Come see our snowman. He needs a hat." The title still startled him. Sometimes not father or dad, but Papa Jackson, a name that acknowledged both his place in her life and the parents she had lost. It was Lily's way of making room in her heart for new love without displacing the old wisdom that humbled him, coming from one so young. "Coming, sweetheart," he called back, descending the porch steps into the crisp snow. As he helped position his old work hat on the snowman's head, he felt Adelaide's gaze from the kitchen window, warm, approving, loving. They hadn't married, not yet. Both felt it important to establish their family on solid ground first, to ensure the children were secure in their new home before adding the formality of vows. But the promise was there in shared glances, in gentle touches, in the way Adelaide had gradually moved her belongings into the main bedroom, in the plans they made for spring planting and summer grazing. That evening, after the children were asleep, Jackson and Adelaide sat before the fire, sharing the comfortable silence of people who no longer needed constant words to communicate. Snow fell softly beyond the windows, and the house creaked and settled around them like a living thing. "I had a letter from Meyer today," Jackson said eventually. "Pine Ridge is getting a new doctor in the spring. Young fellow from back east looking to establish or to practice somewhere his services are needed." Adelaide smiled, her fingers continuing their steady knitting. "Samuel must be pleased. He's been wanting to retire for years. He suggested I might consider taking on the young doctor as an apprentice of sorts, teaching him about local remedies, helping him adjust to country practice." Adelaide's hands stilled. "And what did you say?" "I said I'd think about it." Jackson gazed into the fire, watching the flames dance over the logs. "It's been a long time since I practiced medicine properly. Not sure I remember how." "I think it's like riding a horse," Adelaide suggested gently. "The knowledge remains even when unused for years." She set aside her knitting, moving to perch on the arm of his chair. "You were a good doctor, Jackson. You could be again if you wanted." He looked up at her, still sometimes amazed that she was here, that any of them were. "And you, what would you want?" Adelaide's smile deepened, a hint of mischief in her green eyes. "I might enjoy assisting a country doctor. I have some experience with nursing, after all." The simple exchange held layers of meaning, not just about potential vocations, but about healing more broadly. About using their hard-won knowledge to help others, about transforming their own wounds into sources of compassion and understanding. Later, as they prepared for bed, Jackson paused before the small table where he kept his father's pocket watch. He opened it as he did each night, running his thumb over the worn case. But tonight, for the first time, he didn't look at the daguerreotype of Hannah and James inside the lid. Instead, he focused on the watch itself, the steady tick, marking not what he had lost, but what remained. What had been found. Time moving forward. Life continuing. A family rebuilt from broken pieces into something new and precious. Adelaide's arms encircled him from behind her cheek, resting against his shoulder. "All right," she asked softly. Jackson closed the watch, setting it gently on the table. "Yes," he said, turning to embrace her. "Better than all right." Outside, snow continued to fall, covering Lone Star Ranch in a blanket of pristine white. Beneath the old pine on the hill, Hannah and James rested peacefully, their graves marked by simple stones, now softened by winter's touch. And inside the house they had once called home, new life had taken root, different from what had been before, but no less beautiful for the difference. Jackson Hargrove, who had once measured his days by what was missing, now counted his blessings instead. A woman who had chosen him despite knowing his flaws. Children who brought laughter back to rooms too long silent. And the chance against all odds to begin again. The oath he had made under the pines to protect Adelaide and the children to stand against Blackwell's evil had been fulfilled. But in its place, new promises had formed. Quieter vows spoken not in moments of crisis but in daily acts of care and commitment. To heal, to hope, to love, and most importantly to live, not merely exist in the present that had been so dearly won.